And welcome to the RoboWave Fundamentals course. This is a really exciting course for the new Houdini users. We really want to explore every aspect of Houdini and how you can generate geometry and create terrains and simulations and doing a little bit of destruction. And yeah, we've got some nice effects going on. So this is really fully packed course, and it really touches on the basic level of each component of how you would achieve a shot. And what we want to really do with this course is give you a nice grounding, and at the end of the day be able to, for instance, this turntable here, we want to be able to output this and possibly in your own variation of the building and setup, and we can come up with something that's really nice to present on your showreel as a stepping stone into learning Houdini. And yeah, we've obviously got some nice effects. So just going to the first couple of sessions in what we're going to be learning. We've got actually this is probably going into like week 1. We're going to be modeling this building, but if you haven't used Houdini at all and you're totally new, we've got a week 0 that's a online course as well, and this is a full-fledged course of just exploring the interface and installing Houdini, what versions to use. So definitely check that out first if you have not explored or utilized Houdini in any way. And then we'll work on to the first week, which is creating one of these buildings. And there's a couple of variations we can do, but that's really about modeling these shapes and getting everything right. And like I said, it's a mixture between creating a procedural setup and then having a little bit of artistic control over the placements and really crafting the look and how we want to see things. We'll move on further on to the next week, and we'll start exploring adding assets to the building just for like decoration and added interest. And these are procedural setups that you can hand place, and like I said, it gives you that proceduralism, but actually having artistic control over where exactly you want things to be placed. And I think that's key, is to utilize these tools to really enhance a product and just give you exactly what you want, instead of just procedurally generating a whole bunch of stuff. It's not always ideal. You don't always get exactly what you want, and this way we will learn how to manipulate the data and do exactly create exactly the elements we want to do. In the next kind of setup, we'll start looking at the terrains for specifically like the turntable and how we generate the outer terrain and the circle, and how we integrate it into the building setup and stuff. And we'll then move on to a slightly bigger setup, which is creating these mountains. And these were mountains that were generated for the trailer. We'll look at how we generated that, and these are background mountains, but they got quite a lot of detail and they look really nice, and it's definitely worth exploring how they come together. And then we'll move on to some volumetric stuff. So we'll be touching on the Houdini clouds in Houdini 20, and just how we actually manipulate volumes and what the difference is between a SDF and a fog volume. We'll explore that as well. You can see some nice, interesting stuff happening there. And then we'll be moving on to some effects work in the later weeks. So we've got some particles, some fireworks going on, and just to see how how we set up these workflows. And basically what's happening is get these streams, and then what happens at the end of the stream, you get another burst. And this is a procedural kind of fireworks setup, and we'll look at how we do that. And then we'll move on further on in the week. We'll go on to some vellum, and we'll be simulating some cloth and we'll move on to the feature-rich version of Vellum. There's so much stuff going on in Vellum. It's an awesome simulator. And we can do cloth, and we can do soft bodies and grains and fluids, and we'll be looking at all the different aspects of Vellum and just really touching on each one and the different types of, we can see soft bodies and how they behave, the different ones behave. So it's a good example of that. And then we've got some nice fluids, and we've got fluids interacting with soft bodies. So this is also really nice to just explore and get the feel of how Vellum works and how we can utilize it in a bigger production environment. And then we'll go on to some rigid body dynamics, and we've got some nice destruction of the building here. But beyond that, we will look at some other effects and just really see how you can actually use rigid bodies in a different way. And we've got some, following a curve here and stuff like that, and covering how the constraints and everything works in Bulletin, just to give you a good basic understanding of the workflow of rigid body dynamics. And then we'll be moving on further on in the week. We'll go on to some pyro stuff, and this is where it really gets quite cool if you're into your explosions stuff. So we'll be looking at how we can set up these setups at the explosions, and there's a shot from the trailer. We'll pretty much be looking at this one explosion that's coming up here, and just how we set that up and how we extend on utilizing the rigid bodies from the previous week to create some extra trails and integrate the explosion with that. And then we'll also look at some dust setups. So we have a dust setup here. It's quite nice, and it's got some additional grains in it. And yeah, so just to kind of make it feel quite nice, and the behavior of dust as it's kind of sinking down as it travels and stuff like that. And then we'll move on to a little bit more of other kind of examples. So we've got some spreading fire, and we'll utilize some of the built-in tools and to see how we can actually generate these quite quickly. Some really nice feature-rich tools we have to our disposal. This is, it's really fun to work with, and you can just manipulate the data and create some really nice results very quickly. So we'll be looking at how we can generate some of that stuff. And then moving on, we'll be going on to some fluid stuff. We've got some flip simulation stuff here, some whitewater coming up, and we'll have a look at some various options of fluid simulations and how we can manipulate that data, and obviously oceans, large scale oceans, and how that works with the flip. And then we can move on to, we'll do some scene assembly, and we'll be building these turntables specifically just to create a really nice look. And we'll have a look at the lighting context in Houdini, and we can, as you can see, we'll go through some of the setup and manipulate the data, bring everything in, assign shaders, some lights, and then explore the different render styles. So we've got Karma XPU, and we've nice FOSS previews, and then we've got the CPU render, which will be for our final renders. And we can explore how all this stuff comes together, and then so like I say, it's really exciting. Looking forward to getting started with this course, and good luck everyone. Hope you enjoy this one. Thank you. Hey, and welcome to week 2 of the fundamentals. In this week, we're just going to take a deeper dive in the geometry context, and we're going to start modeling our Star Wars building. For that, we're going to look at different node types, and we're going to explore how we chain things and track the data through the nodes. But before we get started, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So I've got a new scene open here. I'm just going to go to File, and I want to go to create a new project. New project. Let's just give the project a name. So I'm going to call this Fundamentals. And then we've got a set of paths. So I'm just going to open up this up. And in my case, I'm using my Z drive, and I've got a Rebelware folder. And then you can just click OK. So it will use that folder, and then it will create another folder with this fundamentals name. Click accept. So now I've got this path. And then I'm just going to leave all this for now. Some of them we won't be using it, but let's just leave this. What it does is it just creates a bunch of directories on disk for you. But what I want to do is I want to add 2 more. So I'm going to go to custom, and I'm going to type hip. And this is where we're going to store our hip files, our Houdini files. And then another one I just want to add is a reference, and I'm just going to call this reference. And that's if we've got reference data you want to load in, and we can check that out like that. I'm going to hit accept. And then you just want to go File, Save As. And you'll see I'm pretty much in that folder structure already. You can see all those folders are created. And then in the hip, I'm just going to save my hip file, so we've got an immediately saved file, even though it's blank. So I'm going to call this building start, and it's good to give it a version. You can call this whatever you want. Accept. All right, now that we've got the scene saved, let's just move into one or two other things. And I really want to clean up this desktop a tiny bit. I'm not going to remove a lot of stuff just because I want to keep it as default as possible for you guys while you're learning. But I'm going to go to this desktops, and I'm going to go to the desktop manager, and I'm just going to duplicate this build. So click on this arrow and let's duplicate the build. And under this, I'm going to call this build space JS for my name. You can call this whatever you want. And I'm going to accept or apply and accept. And I'm going to switch to this build JS. And now let's just do some editing. So I'm going to remove this guy. I'm going to remove the composite view for now, the render view, the animation editor. It's not really useful over here. We'll be using it, but in a different place, because you need a viewport and a animation editor while you're doing it. So let's just close that out. And then just coming over to this panel on this side, there's a takes list we're not going to use. I'll leave the performance monitor for now. And the tree view we're going to delete out. This material palette we don't need, and the assets browser we're going to delete out. And then I just want to go from my motion effects view to my scene view. Let's just make sure we're back in our object context here. And then I want to split this scene view into 2. So I'm just going to split this top and bottom, like so. And then obviously we don't want another scene view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this guy, and I'm going to change this to the inspectors geometry spreadsheet. The geometry spreadsheet will come into play. Just now it's quite important to have this open when you're tracking your data and what kind of attributes and stuff you're setting up. So we definitely want this. And then I'm just going to click another one, and I'm going to go to the animation editor. So we've got an animation editor here docked as well, just for possible future reference. Let's click on that, and then go back to my desktops at the top, and let's just save current desktop. And you'll see it's successfully saving this desktop. One thing to note while we're here is this is version based. So you'll see currently the scene I've got open is 19.5, and we'll change that. But if I go to version 20, you have to copy this desktop across manually. Otherwise, you'll have to reset it up. It's folder specific. Okay, but I'm just going to click OK. All right. Okay, the other thing we wanted to do while we over here, I've got some reference images we want to look at for our building. So I just wanted to open up the directory where our project is sitting, and I've got some reference files that I want to use in my network editor, and I'll show you how to use that now. But I've basically got under this reference little folder we created, I am dropping in week 2, I've got some building stills. And there's a couple of different variations here, and we'll have a look at them, but I want to use them within Houdini now. So what's quite handy, let's just go into geometry context. So I'm going to create a geometry by hitting tab and start typing geometry, and then click on that to place it. And let's just call this building main. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building one building, and then we'll do some variations around that building, and we'll just utilize this and copy stuff out of it and transform things around. But for now, let's just double click to go inside, or enter, press enter. And then first we just make some space here. What I want to do, there's this little image icon, and we can add images. So if I go to my fundamentals folder and we go down to reference over here, let's just expand this window out a bit. Week 2 and building stills, and now I've got a bunch of references in here. First one we can loading is this main building base model. Click accept, and you'll see now I've got this image in my network viewer, and you can zoom in and out in your network image viewer, and if you middle mouse, and you can pan around, and this image you can see is actually stuck to the network viewer. What we can as well do, what we want to do is we can move this around, and what you can do is go to tools and go to edit background images, and you can actually scale them up and down here and then move them around. And while I've got this on, is I want to bring in some of those other images. Now you can see this one I've colored different colors to these almost sections, and that's what we're going to be building. We're going to be building one section at a time and then assembling the building like that. So let's just start off by bringing those images in. So I'm going to click on the image icon again, and let's bring in building block A. And I'm going to put this here and scale it down a bit. And let's do B. Same thing. Scale it down. You can change the opacity on these as well. It just can be quite handy depending on the image. And then let's just continue. So we've got C. Scale this down a little bit, move it out. And then D. And you can see I'm just going to carry on and place these quickly. And then the last one, E, which is this little purple guy at the end here. And I'm just going to drop this over here at the end. So I'm kind of setting them up next to each other, and we can maybe space this out as we go, but I want to build the network for this block underneath each of these sections so we get an idea of what we're doing. Okay, when we're more or less happy with our scaling and our positions, we can just go onto our tools layouts and then just disable this edit images. And there we go. Now they're locked to the desktop again, so, or to the panel, should I say. And let's go ahead and start looking at creating our first component. So I'm going to zoom into the network here, and you can see I've actually created little sizes here just so it's easier for us to get started on not guessing the sizes in the viewport. This is not quite 100% to scale. It's a little bit larger than scale, so the doors and stuff, but it's fantasy, so we're not too concerned about that at the moment. Okay, so starting off this, I want to just create a simple box to start with. It's a fairly straightforward shape. So I'm going to hit tab and then type box. on here, and you can see it's highlighted. So I'm just going to click on that and then click on the mouse again to drop it, and let's just place it directly under here. And you can see it's now, I've got this little box, and if you actually look at this geometry spreadsheet, we've got some coordinates here, and this is kind of your base attributes. It's your position coordinates, your px, y, and z. And then what I want to do is just give it size. So we've obviously got some measurements to work with. So I'm going to make it 10 units, and this is Houdini scale is 10, is units is meters. So we're quite good with this. So we just did 10 units is 10 meters. And then we want to go 8 meters in the x-axis, and I want to do 3.5 meters in the y-axis. It's up. Now you can see, if you look at this picture, this house is sitting on top of the grid, whereas now we've got, if I rotate around, you can see I've got this box and it's sitting halfway through the grid. And what you can actually do is you can come up here to this center, and this is basically controls the centroid of the box, and you can lift this up, up here, and you can say, okay, it's more or less on there. And that's not entirely ideal, because what happens now if you decide this building's too low and you go, oh, I want it to be, I don't know, 5 meters. Now you've got it dropping down below this grid again, and now you've got to come into the center and try and adjust it again and get it to line up again. So what we can do is actually copy this parameter, and then we paste it in this side, and we divide with a simple math function, we divide the value by 2. So let's do this. We go copy parameter, if we right click on this value, and then what I do on this one is if I right click, and down here there's a paste relative reference, and you'll see, let's just clean this out. For some reason it's given me a bad value. You'll see this is what you should get. If I click on this center once, it will give me that exact value, because what it's doing is it's copying this channel directory. So it's channel, and this channel is actually called, if you hover over this thing, you can see under parameters, there it says size X, size Y, size Z, and you can just see, okay, we're using size Y, and we're calling that channel, this parameter channel up here. But then what I can do, because now it's obviously high off the grid, is I can just do a simple divide by 2. And now we've got this box, and it's sitting perfectly on the plane. And now if I go back to my height, which is 3.5, you can see only the top moves down, because we're compensating for this value with this divide. Okay, then we want to look at, you can see this building's got a little bit of a sort of edge. It's not straight up, it's kind of tapered inwards. And we can do this in 2 ways. And there's a non-procedural way and a procedural way. So the first way I'll show you is a non-procedural way. And you can go ahead and use the select icon here. And then you can select this top face. And you'll see it's going yellow. And so now we've got that selected. Now what you can do in the viewport, you can also hit tab, and it comes up with all the nodes you can use. And now you can start typing edit. So go edit, and this brings up a little edit, and you'll see it's dropped a new node for us here in the network called edit. And you can see it's targeting a primitive, and this primitive that I've selected here is actually called primitive 2. I could change that up to one of these other ones. You can actually look at primitive numbers by clicking over here. And if I zoom in, you can see there's a little 4 there. It's hard to see here. It's 2. And there's 1 on this side, and 5. So each primitive has a number, and you can select by number. Now this is a little bit dangerous, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But for now, I'm just going to go to my viewport here, and you can see now I can move that top face around. So what I would want to do in this case is I want to switch to scale, and you can hit scale here, or you can actually go to Y on the keyboard, and that if you click on Y, it will cycle through gizmo width, rotation and transforms, and just scale. These are the scale handles. And then you've got your position handles. So let's just go to our scale. And what we want to do is we want to scale this guy down. So the building looks like a tapered. So on the middle one, if you click it, will do a uniform scale of everything. So we just click that and we kind of drag down a little bit to the side and down, and you'll see now we're getting that scale. And that's great. That's kind of looking all right. But ideally what I want to do is I want to make it a little bit more procedural without having selections of faces. So I'm going to delete this edit. I'm going to just go with my mouse and box select it, and then I'm going to press delete on the keyboard. Now another option what we could do here then is do deformation. And for this, I'm going to hit tab over my network here, and I'm going to type taper. And this is a little deformer. So once I've got it selected, then I'm going to click on it and click down here. Oh, it's giving me an error because obviously I haven't connected it to this. It says required geometry to bend. And we're just going to drag and select this line to connect it up, and now that error disappears. Now it's worth noting that this is a little bit of a global modifier with deformer, and it's got a couple of options. And when you type tab on the keyboard and I do my taper, it's dropping the same node as if I would go bend and I drop that bend. You can actually see this is exactly the same node, and if you look at the top, this first parameter says bend, even though this is just called linear taper. Just a preset has been adjusted for us automatically, so we get the correct preset that we want when we actually drop it. You could just manually drop a bend and then switch these parameters out to use the taper instead. Now I'm just going to select this and delete it again. And let's have a look at our taper. So then we can just quite quickly just go, okay, we've got a taper value, and we can slide that inwards or outwards. And you can see, well, there's a little bit of a problem at the moment because it's tapering in the wrong way. And we can adjust that quite nicely. There's some viewport controls for us. If I press enter in the viewport, it's giving me a little icon here. And I just want to use some viewport controls, and you can see there's some controls up here, and it's let's just look at the toggle capture, toggle deform, and you can cycle capture, and you can fit capture. So let's start off with this B, because what we want to do, what the cycle does, is it will change the capture direction, and the capture direction is almost the direction that it's going to be deforming at. So at the moment, if I pan around, you can see it's deforming on this axis, and if I hit my B, and now you can see it's deforming on this in a different axis, and if I hit B again, now you can see I'm tapering inwards based off that axis. And what it does is it's changing this capture direction on this node. So if you look at this capture direction, and let's just cycle through that again over the keyboard and keep note of that capture direction. So if I hit B, now you see my 1 is on my z-axis, and now if I look at this, it's on -1 on my x, and then I'm back to 1 on my y-axis, which is what we want. And then you've got other options which we'll look at. You can do toggle deform, and this basically controls, it's not really going to be useful in this case, but it controls, you can control the viewport here, or how you want to squash and stretch it. And if I had a higher res mesh, you would see, you can see my little guides are going out, so you would be able to do quite interesting deformations if you had a higher resolution piece of geometry, but we're not doing that at the moment. We're keeping our geometry quite light, so that's not useful to us. I'm just going to set that to 1 again. And then let's just dial this in a little bit and look at our reference picture. And that's looking all right. Now we want to move on to just maybe some beveling around the edge so the edge isn't so hard. You can just hit escape on the keyboard here, and that will take us back to our camera mode and out of that viewport gizmo that comes with the bend. I'm just going to turn off these little displays, my primitive display button here. And yeah, there we go. So now let's look at how we do this little poly bevel. So for that, I'm going to, in my network edit again, I'm going to hit tab again, and let's type poly bevel, the first thing that actually comes up, and you can just click on that. And then what you can actually do if you want is you can actually drop it directly onto this button. And once I click and let go on my mouse, you'll see it automatically connects it, and then it drops it down into a reasonable space, and it's lined up quite nicely. So it's quite a neat way of attaching nodes together. And let's just view this, and we'll zoom into this thing. And on this node, we've got a couple of options. The one we're concerned with at the moment is the distance, and that is basically how much we're going to bevel. And you'll see as I drag that up, there is a bevel starting to happen. And you can actually look at this if you press enter in the viewport while you're over it, and I'm hitting space just to orbit around while I've got this gizmo and entered into the viewport. You can see it got a little bit of a green color going, and you can see quite quickly where the bevels are being applied. And these bevels are being applied everywhere because I don't have any groups or any setups here. So we'll get into some of that kind of stuff at a later stage. But for now, you can see these bevels are quite flat, and what I want to do is, round them off a bit so they're a bit smoother. And then you can do this fillet, and we can set different shapes. So I can do solid, crease, chamfer, or round. In this case, I just want to keep it round. And then you can increase the divisions. And if I zoom in here a little bit more, you can see now I've got some divisions and they're going around. It doesn't really have to be too high. We just want it to be at a decent curve. And that's not looking too bad. Let's make the bevel slightly bigger. Just looking at our reference here again, and then we can zoom out. And there we go. We've got the base walls for our building currently. I just want to move on to this garage door, and not actually creating the garage door, but the placement of where it's going to be. And I'll show you what I mean. It's sort of just the indentation of where the garage is. So for that, what I'm going to do is let's just have a look. So we've got our box and our taper. And now how could we do this? Essentially what we want to do is create another box with a similar shape, and we actually want to cut it out. And for that, we can use a Boolean operation. So I'm going to go ahead and create another box. Let's drop it here. And then I'm just going to scale it up a bit. And let's just give this a value of, let's try 10. 10. Okay, that's a bit large. Maybe make it a bit smaller, 8. Not really. So it's still quite large. So let's just scale this down with our ladder in the viewport so it's quicker. You can see I'm just rotating around just to see. I want if you look at this picture, it's just a little bit over halfway, I guess, and it's inset to the side. So I'm going to go ahead and create another box, and let's just tab again and type box. Press enter. Now we've got this box in the screen here in the viewport. We can see it, and I'm going to pan around, and I'm pressing enter on the keyboard to invoke the little handles. And what you can see is it's got these little red ends on each end. And what we can actually do is we can click and drag each end out. So let's just click and drag, and I'm going to rotate around, holding spacebar down and clicking my left mouse button, and then just go to a nice angle, and we can see this one now. So let's drag this out to this side, I'm going to move around again and then just click on this front one. I'm going to bring this quite far out. And then we need some height here. So let's just bring this up to a decent height and looking more or less to the front. Let's just scale this in on this side, just looking at this building. It's kind of halfway, maybe just over halfway, that garage door. And let's just have a look at that. It's not too bad for now. We can adjust it just now, but what I want to do is I want to get this taper in here into a similar kind of range. And for that, what we could do is we could create a new one, or I can just copy and paste this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to Alt and left click and drag to the side and let go of my mouse button and drops a new one. And you can see this is obviously connected to my previous box still. And what I can do to reconnect this is I can actually just click and drag on this line, this connection line. And you can see it's got like a midpoint where I've got my mouse, and I can just push it to this button and it will snap there. And when I let go of my mouse, now you can see it's connected to this box too. And let's just switch the display over. I'm going to click on this display icon, and now we can see our box has got a bit of a taper. But now we can't see our main building, so it's hard for us to judge if it's working correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and use this template option, and this is the second button here, the purple one. And if you click on this, it basically ghosts the other objects in your network, and you'll get to be able to see roughly where they are. So I'm going to come back to my taper and have a look at that. I think our box is more or less in the wrong position. So I'm going to go up to the box, and then let's move this box over a little bit and maybe move it up and scale this maybe a bit higher. Yeah, roughly like that. Now, one thing you'll notice is this taper isn't quite sitting right. It's scaled in on the one side, but it's squared off here. And what's happened is when I copy this and paste it here, it's using this original capture details that was used to create this box. And it's basically, you can see this capture line is sitting in the middle of the scene. And that's not ideal. We want this capture line to sit in the middle of this box, so it tapers evenly inwards on all sides. And what you can do, if you press onto the keyboard so you can see this manipulators here, there is, if you look at this list, there's a couple of options, and further down there's a fit capture, and that is N. So if I hit N on the keyboard, you can see immediately that's kind of in the center now, this line's in the center. And if you look at the parameters up here on the node itself, you can see the origin and stuff's changed according to the center of this box. And now I've got this box that's tapered quite nicely. But you can see obviously, so it's a little bit smaller than the other box, and it's lower down, so the taper is not quite correct. So we're just going to manually pull that in a bit. Let's just adjust this box up a little bit more. And I don't want it to go so far in. This is quite useful because I actually want this inside of this door to be a little bit flat. So if you look, kind of, as I scale it down, it's quite cool. The capture region of that deform is actually picking up on this side of the box, and now you can see I've got this taper, and I'm just going to pull it back to around here somewhere, and that doesn't look too bad at the moment. And now we need to combine these guys, obviously, and like I said before, we want to try and use the Boolean function, and we can do that quite simply by, let's just click on this little button here this time, and I'm going to hit tab and type Boolean, and that comes up, and click on it and press enter. Now I've got this Boolean, and it needs a second input, and that's going to be my little box on the side. So I'm going to click and drag and drop onto geometry B, And now let's view this Boolean. And you can see immediately it's given us what we want. And essentially by default, the Boolean is set to subtract. And there's a couple of options here. We could actually union it. So this Boolean becomes now one object, or we could intersect, and that leaves us with just the intersection points of that outer building and this door area that we wanted to create. And then there's one or two other options, but we'll just go back to the subtract for now. And we can see we've got that little shape starting to come in together. I think moving on now, we just want to create some windows, and then we create these little ledges. Just before we get into the ledges, I just wanted to clarify that you could move this box around still, and you would still get your Boolean operation. This is again that procedural nature where you can modify data upstream, and that's this data is the point positions, which you can change here, and that's being modified, and then the Boolean still works. It tries its best to work. Sometimes, in some cases, it will break, and that just, it depends on the geometry using. But for now, let's start having a look at doing some of these windows. And again, we're keeping it simple, and we're going to use some boxes again. And this time we're going to utilize some basic duplication of those boxes. So I'm going to drop another box again. Let's just drop this a little bit lower down. Okay, but this time I'm going to pretty much leave the values at default. And what I want to do now is just view it. I'm going to just view this box, and it's template the existing building that we have so far. Let's have a look at how we can get this into the correct place. So I'm going to drop a transform node and hit type transform on the tab here, and you can see there's a transform node, and I'm going to drop this on this button and to connect it immediately. And let's just view this, and you can see now we've got our box. If I press enter on the keyboard, I've got those controls, and if I now select the transform node, you can see those little gizmo scale things go away, and I've just got a transform handle, and this transform allows me to just move this box around while still keeping the position of the original one. And what's quite good about this is if you want to make variations of something, you kind of want to work at the origin, and that's the same as what we're doing with this entire block here, is we're working at the center of the grid, and then once we've done with this block, we'll move it into a better position. And I'm going to do this with the same with the windows. I'm going to move it out, and let's just, for instance, say let's just have a look at this setup here. So we've got two kind of biggish windows on the sides here, and let's move one into position. So I've got this box, and what we're going to do again is use another Boolean operation to kind of put these together. So now this box is obviously not looking perfectly at the moment, so we just want to maybe change the shape a bit. And now what I can do is I can click on this box, and I can scale maybe along X with a ladder, or Y, and I can scale it up and down, and it's keeping that position that I've just created. And this is quite useful for just finely adjusting stuff later down the chain or earlier up the chain, and it kind of propagates through to the bottom. And then what I want to do is just maybe taper it a bit, and let's just go back to this top level and before our transform, and let's look at doing a taper. So I'm just going to do another quick taper here, and let's drop that in the middle. And you can see now I'm viewing this box, but I've got this selected, and when I've got this selected, you can actually see the ghosting of the box come up here. So you could work like this if you want, and you're comfortable with Houdini, and then I could kind of scale my values over here, and you can see them updating at the end of the node network where I've repositioned it. But for now, let's just view this so we can see exactly that box and visualize what it's doing. Now again, the axis is in the wrong way. I wanted to taper it towards the top. So what we can do is, again, look at our list, and we've got this cycle capture again. So we can hit B on the keyboard, B again, and now we've got this kind of tapering up to the top, and we can adjust the values here. And that's not looking too bad. It's just a little bit of a taper, so the window looks a little bit more interesting. Let's just view the output of that again. And I'm going to rotate around my viewport to have a look. It's not looking too bad, but what again I want to do is I want to give it some rounded corners. And again, we're going to use another poly bevel. And I'm just going to copy and paste this one again so we can Alt, click and drag. And this time we'll just drop it down here, and then I'm going to click and drag my connector and connect it to this transform one. Actually, before I do that, what I want to do is actually want to do it the other way around. And why do I want to do it the other way around? So if I want to adjust this, I could do that quite easily, but if I want to change the scale of this, then it's going to change this bevel scale at the end of the chain. So if I view this bevel now, you can see this bevel is getting big because my object's small. And so if I scale this back up, and if I look at the bevel now, you can see the bevel's gotten small again. So it's just a different order of doing things. If you imagine you want the bevel at a specific size and to stay that size according to your model, then you can just do it before you're scaling up, if you're going to be scaling up. So what I'm going to do, quite handy with Houdini, you can just shake this node and it will become loose. And then I can just drag it and I can hover over this line, and you'll see it kind of tries to connect there. And as soon as I let go of my mouse button, it connects that node. Now I've got my little bevel sitting here in the center of the scene, and it's got my bevel amount. Let's make it a bit more. That's not looking too bad. And then just let's go back to our transform. So I'm going to click and view that. And now you can see I've got my transform, which I've actually scaled up over here. And I'm just going to reset this to 1. Now we've got this, and it's a decent size, not looking too bad. And let's go ahead and Boolean this in to the rest of the building. So I'm going to drop another Boolean, and I want to connect this first input to our existing structure with the door in, or the garage door. And then let's just view this, and then I'm going to connect this transform to the Boolean in the second geometry. And now you can see I've got this window indentation. And now what I can do with this transform, I can now move it down to a decent location and just reposition it in a finer manner to exactly where I want it. Let's just have a look at our reference. We're not looking too bad, but there is 2 of these on this side. So we could essentially select all these, and if I could duplicate them by clicking and dragging, and now we have 2 of them, and I could do a merge operator. Click this, and if I connect this one and this one, and then connect my Boolean output to that, now I've got 2. And then if I hit this transform on the second one I've created and then just drag it over, now I've got my 2 windows. But we don't want to do it like that, because now we're duplicating a whole bunch of networks. And if I change this window's size or the taper amount on this, or even the bevel on the one, you can see now I've only got the one being affected, and that's not ideal, because now if they make a change, we'll have to go to each one and manually update that. I'm just going to undo that change on the bevel, and I'm going to delete this side that I've just created out and this merge. Now what I can do is I can actually just duplicate this And for that, I can use a duplicate node. So I'm going to hit tab again and type duplicate. And let's just drop this after our transform onto this wire, and it will connect automatically. Now I've got this copy. It says copy your node, and it says copy and transform. And you've got a number of transforms you can do, or a number of copies you can do, and you can do transforms and stuff like that. And you'll see there's a handle in the viewport, and I can just slide this over as far as I want it. And what it will do is it will create a copy in that direction that I'm moving it. So for instance, I could actually even rotate it a bit. And then if I make another copy, so it's got a total of 2 copies. And if I copy, and every time I copy, it does the same offset and the same rotation adds onto that. So you can see you got this quite cool effect, and you can now rotate this, and if you want a bunch of windows together or something, and maybe offset them different angles, so you can have quite an interesting setup. So now I've got some windows falling out the ground or into the ground. And yeah, so that's the copy. So let's just reset these values. I obviously don't want to do this. And I'm going to middle mouse and control click on this transform. And it's going to set my values there. You can see I've still got the rotate. So I'm going to middle mouse on this value and click again on my to reset it. Okay, now I've got this, and now I've got 6 copies, and I actually only want 1 copy. And then I'm going to click and drag on the X, and let's move this up. Oh, sorry, I wanted 2 copies. And then we can position that. So now what's happened now is I've got a duplicate of that setup. And now if I change my taper, for instance, both of them get tapered at the same time. I can change the height of my box up and down to make it longer and thinner windows. And I can also change the bevel if I need to make a bigger bevel and slightly rounder windows. What I'll do now is go ahead and create some additional windows. Let's have a look at our reference here. So we can see we've got 3 windows in the front here. And I know in my original model here, I've got some additional windows off on the side here as well. And let's have a look at just adding those in. So let's just scroll down back here. And now instead of recreating all this stuff, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this transform and I'm going to duplicate it by using my Alt again and left mouse button. And let's just zoom around to where we are so we can see, okay, there's my selection. So I can view it. So let's view this transform. And let's move it to the front of the building. And I'm going to rotate this around. So let's rotate this around on the y-axis. And what I want to do is I want to snap it to 90-degree angles. So I'm going to hold down my control key on 45-degree angles. And let's say, okay, we've got a 90-degree rotation here. And then let's just move it into place. So we're going to have it around here somewhere. And let's bring it into the building a little bit. And you can see it's a little bit bigger than what's in the reference. These reference windows are quite skinny. And for this is I'm just going to, on this actual transform, is I'm actually just going to scale the window down on one axis, and you can scale it up. This isn't exactly 100% ideal, but in this case it works just because it scales the window a little bit, and without basically what I don't want to do is duplicate a whole lot of data all the time. So I'm building this data and using it in multiple locations. So we can just now do our copy again, or our duplicate. And this time I want to duplicate this window along the z-axis. And I'm just going to move it out a little bit. And I want 3 copies this time. So let's just move it out a little bit. have a look at our reference. It's maybe a little bit high up. I think perhaps the other windows are a little bit high up as well, so we can fix that. But let's just, for now, what we can do is I want to use the same Boolean operation. And you can see that's not obviously not connected. So what I can do is just I can object merge these two streams. So there's two windows and these. And if I do tab and type merge, and let's just select both of them and then select the buttons and then click and drag into this merge. And now let's just view the merge, and you see I've got my window shapes. Outer shapes are kind of all combined together now. And now we can just go to this transform and maybe let's lower these windows a little bit. I want to lower these ones a little bit as well. And we can make them a little bit skinnier, I think, just for visual interest. And move them in a little bit. So I'm moving this first one and it moves the all three copies inwards. And then we can reroute this wire to our Boolean. So let's just click on the wire and drag it to the merge one and reconnect it there. Now let's view our Boolean 2 again. And there we go. We've got our little window set up coming together. What we probably want to do is just call this a reasonable name. So let's just call this Windows, Boolean Windows. And let's say Boolean garage door. Okay. And then we've got some windows on this side I want to recreate as well. So again, I'm going to do the same process and then merge it in. So let's copy and paste these ones that we haven't scaled down. So I'm going to click my Alt again, drag out to this side. And I'm going to go right in and I'm just going to connect this into my merge as well. So now I've got 3 inputs into my merge. And let's just rotate around to see. So now I've got my windows here. I can click on here. I will drag, select over the transform, and you'll see a handle comes up there if I've got enter in the viewport in my viewport state. And then I can just move this along my axis this way, my Z axis. And you can see now I've got something happening there, starting to come through this side. But I perhaps don't want them this big, so maybe we can just scale them down a little bit this side as well. So let's just scale them along this axis so they're a little bit more squared off. Oh, sorry, didn't want to rotate them. And we can just bring them up a little bit this way. Now I've got quite interesting little windows happening up on all the sides. Okay, let's have a look at what we need to build next. So I'm just going to go back to my reference and let's have a look at this. So we've got these little ledges we can build, but what I'm going to do as an assignment for you guys is I want you to add these on yourselves. This is essentially just adding boxes, placing them, and booleaning them in quite a simple structure to follow. So let me know how that goes. But then I want to move on to these columns, and they've got a bit of a curve in them. So let's just have a look at a nice efficient way of how we're going to set that up. Okay, let's just go scroll down here. You can see we're starting to add quite a bit of nodes. So I'm just going to drag these two and maybe let's organize it a bit more. So we're a little bit further under our little picture. We can always move the picture afterwards, but you can see we're starting to build up a bit of a tree of data. Okay, so moving on to these little pillars. What I want to do is create that specific shape, and what I can do is I can actually use a curve tool, and for this we can again type the curve tool in here. So let's just type curve, and for now I'm going to use curve bezier, and let's just click on that and to have a look at it. So I'm going to view this. We don't have to, we can keep this templated for now. So let's have a look what we can do. So we've got some options to draw curves initially. There's different styles of drawing Bezier is quite a good one, so we'll stick with that. But I want to draw this curve out, and if I try and draw it here now, and if you just click on the viewport and drag down and click, and every time you click, it creates a point. And let's just connect this up here. You can see it's not doing too bad a job, but sometimes what happens is if you're building at an angle that it doesn't stick to the correct axis, so you can see that line's gone off now backwards, and that's not really ideal. We want to keep it, make sure it's flat. So one way to ensure that is we can actually, let's just reset this. You can delete all this data that you've created by just hitting reset. And what we can do is we can go into one of our side viewports or our front viewport. And to do this, you can, if you press escape on the keyboard, so we're in camera mode. And if I hit the 3 key, you can see now I'm in front mode. And let's, have a look. So we've got our axis here. So we're at 0 location there. And going up, and now we've got an idea of where we are and with the scale of this building that's templated here, we can see roughly what we need to do. So I'm going to build my curve in this viewport, and this will help me just keep the curve aligned to a flat position. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to press enter on the keyboard to invoke the handle. And let's just start at the bottom. So I'm going to click on the 0 here and then click upwards to, let's just say, up this value. And you can actually hold down shift on the keyboard and that snaps it to 45-degree angles. So if now I'm dragging up and down, I'm not clicking yet. I'm just got the mouse freely held and I'm holding down shift key. So I'm going to hold down shift, and now I'm going to click here. And you see it's dropped another point there. And then again, we want to create another point. So without clicking it, hold down shift again. And I'm going to go like this, sort of 2 units out, and click again. And now let's have a look. This part of the geometry was curved. And what you can do with that is you can, let's go here somewhere and you can click, but it just don't click and let go. What you need to do is click and drag. So if I click and hold down and I start dragging, you get these handles, and there's some Bezier handles. And you can see when I drag them out, the line gets curved. And now this is quite useful. So now I can just give it a nice curve, and let's let go of that. And then once I let go, it gives me another option to create another point further down. And I'm going to create this point over here somewhere just by clicking down. And then I want to bring this down to the bottom, but I want it to have a bit of an angle still. So just click it down here and then create my point there. And then lastly, this point that's freely now hovering, I just want to go over the last point and click on that. And now you can see it's created this curve that's closed. You can see it's created a piece of geometry, and it's a flat curve, which we'll look at it from an angle in a second, but I just want to reshape it a little bit. This curve is a bit awkward. So what we can do is just go to this top menu, and it's got a select edit mode. I'm going to click that and select it. And now I can come in, and if I click and select and let go, it will give me this handle again. If you click and drag, it will move the point around. And we can move the point maybe a bit in. And if I click and drag on these handles, I can move these handles around. So let's just give this a nice bit of a elegant curve to it. And I actually want to bring this one down a bit so it's not straight up. So let's just click and drag and move this down a bit, so maybe a bit in. So we've got this like tapering feel everywhere in our building. And let's move this one out a bit, so almost lining up the values a little bit just to make it look a little bit better. Now let's have a quick look at our reference again. We've got a kind of shape happening if you imagine it from the side view, but now we need this thickness. and how we're going to do that. So let's just zoom out and we go back to our curve. And what I want to do is just press escape on the keyboard to go back to camera mode. And now you can see we're still in this front view. And what you can do is you can click on here and you can select your views here. So there's a view, you can do a viewport. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, while I've got my escape key in this camera mode, I'm just going to hit 1 on the keyboard and that takes me back to perspective mode. And now I'm just going to zoom in on this. And to do that, I'm going to hit spacebar G, and that basically hones in on this specific piece of geometry. And now we can see I've got this, and it's it's nice and flat on this 2D plane. So let's have a look at extruding it outwards. And for that, we're going to use an extrude. So again, going here into my network panel, I'm going to hit tab and type poly extrude. We need a poly extrude for this. And there we go, poly extrude. And just going to hit enter to drop it and then click to drop it. And then let's just connect these two up. Okay, so now I'm just going to view this poly extrude. And if I hit enter on the viewport, you can see this little line comes up. And this is allowing me to click, and if I click and drag on it, it gives me an extrusion value that I can extrude outwards, and you can see that's the distance it's extruding along. So I can change that here as well. And we can just give it a nice thickness here. And that's really what we want to do. But if I rotate around, you'll see there's a gap here. And there's just a couple of options on this poly extrude you can use to deal with that. So there is output here, and you can say output front or back or side. And if I disable front, you'll see now this front extrusion's gone and I've only got sides. So I can click on front again. Now I've got that front back, and then I can also click on back. Now I've got a back extrusion. Likewise, I could disable sides, and then I've just got 2 sides left. So that's quite useful to know. And you can also output these extrusions, each one as groups, and we'll utilize that later on. It's quite handy to use. And then lastly, what I want to do with this, I'm quite happy with the shape, is I want to do a poly bevel on it again. So let's do a poly bevel, and I'm going to just drop this on this little button to create it and drop it automatically. And let's click on this to poly bevel. Okay, and let's just give this a little bit of value, and let's just give it a nice little bevel. Now you can see what's happening is we don't have any groups or anything assigned to this object. So every face, if I just go back to 0, almost every line that's in between each primitive is giving us a bevel, and you can see it indicated by this kind of green-blue line. And when I bevel, those are all beveling out. And let's do a subdivision so we can see it's doing that, and that obviously becomes messy. So we only want to do the outside edges. And there's 2 ways we could deal with this. The one way is there's this exclusions, and this is quite intelligent. We can click on this ignore flat edges, and we can set a minimum angle. And if we adjust this angle up, we can see all our angles are disappearing below a certain value. It will not pick up the poly bevel, and this is quite useful. So you can see I'm still getting this corner here, and I'm still getting these corners here, and that's a little bit better. Another way, just to show you what you can do, I'm just going to disable this again, is remember when we looked at this poly extrude, and you said you can output these groups. So I can output this front group, which is this face here. And then what I can do is output the back group, which is this back group here that we created. And now I've got 2 groups essentially. And if I press the info key on my poly extrude, you can see, yeah, I've got some my point attributes, which are these guys, and there down here, there's a little bit more extra information that's come up, and this is saying 2 prim groups, poly extrude and poly extrude. So those are coming in, and there's 1 primitive in each. So this is 1 primitive, this whole face here along the side. And then we could utilize those groups in the poly bevel. So up here on groups, I can click this drop down and you'll see the 2 groups are populated in there. And if you click on one, you'll see it populated into that dialog. And you can immediately see something's changed. And then if I click on the front one, you can see now I've got extrusions just, I've got poly bevels just along the sides of this guy, and it's no longer on the front face here, just on the very sides. So if I, example, just remove it again, and move the front one, so you now see I've already got a poly bevel on this primitive, and I can go back to the front, and now it's on both primitives. And this is a really useful way to kind of just control exactly where you want that poly bevel. Okay, the last little bit of just homework I want to do here, just to clean it up, and this is for copying and positioning later on, is I want to do what we call a match size, and this just moves this object into a center point here. And what we can do with that is just do this match size. So I'm going to tab and hit match size. You can see this over here. And I'm going to click on this button again and drop it, and let's view it. Now you can see it's essentially moved this whole column. If I view the poly bevel 3 and then I go down to the match size, it's moved to the center. I don't really want it at the center. I want it at the bottom of on the grid, like the building. And what we can do now in this case is what's happening is this is taking this whole piece of geometry and it's centering it on the grid, no matter where it is in the world. If I, for instance, let's just do another transform node. This is just for demo. And let's just wire this transform in, and let's move this up into space somewhere out here. This match size, a really useful tool, allows us to snap something to the center of the origin, or it can snap to a different object. And if I view now this match size, you can see it's back at that location. And no matter where I move this transform around in the world, my match size is keeping it there. And that's just a convenient way you'll utilize this when you get effects setups from animation and stuff, and you want to perhaps center a model to your origin to make it easier to work with. You can do that, and then you can, once it's centered, you can do what you need to do with it and then move it back afterwards with the post process to the location you needed it. I'm just going to delete this transform, for there's the demo. And what I want to do now, instead of having it, like I say, dropping out the bottom of the grid, is I want it to align to the bottom of the grid. And what I can do is there's a justify X, Y, and Z, and I can justify by a certain bunch of parameters, and I can do minimum, and that will basically push it up to the top. If I do maximum, it will push it down to the bottom of the grid of this bounding box. So for now, minimum's good. We're going to leave it there. And if I just disable this node, you can see I've just moved it to the center point, and it's just a better place to have it if I want to deal with things afterwards, and I've got it in that location. Okay, so let's have a look at placing these in a decent place on our building. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to center these and put them in a decent location. Okay, so let's just have a look at placing these in the correct location. So just having a look at our reference here again quick. We've got 2 on either side of this garage door. And on my original model, I've got 2 at the back, and they're a little bit smaller. So let's just set that up. So I'm going to drop a transform node, transform, and let's just connect this guy up. So we've got this transform node, and let's view it. And I'm going to press enter on the keyboard, and we go into this transform handle mode. And let's move this out to our location we wanted. And we can see that's kind of in a decent space. And again, what we can do is use our duplicate node and then just connect this by dropping it on the button again. Let's view it and then view our node, and then we can just slide the copy on the Z-axis and move this outwards a little bit. Now you can see we've got a little bit of issue because we've built our garage door a little bit too close to this side. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move my pillar in here and put it in a reasonable position. And then we're going to go back to our garage door, which is up here, which we've named here garage door. And this box too, I'm just going to move this over a little bit. And then I'm going to scale it in on the side here. So we can scale it in. And now we can see we've got a little garage door is lining up a little bit better there. And let's just now merge these guys together so we can see exactly how it's looking. So I'm going to do another Boolean. Essentially just combining all the geometry in a nice way and connect them up. And let's view this output. And obviously you can see now we don't have those pillars anymore and they're intersecting on the building. But what we want to do now is change the operation of the Boolean. So I've got the Boolean selected. We move this operation and we select union. And now it's combining those two meshes into one decent mesh. Another thing I wanted to do just as a last thing was just move these a little bit down. I don't want them to be quite so high up. So if we have some sand, for instance, that's a little bit low, let's just make sure that they are kind of almost like pillars that's been driven into the ground. And those won't be exposed if the sand goes a little bit low. So we can go to our match size for that. And you can see where we've set it to min, there's an offset amount, and we can offset this value a little bit, and we can move them down or up. And so let's just drop them down a little bit. And now we've got them slightly below the ground. So you can imagine they're a structural support and they're giving us that base where the building's attached to. And it's not looking too bad. Just want to actually bring them out a little bit. And I think that's all right. Yeah, that's working for me. And then what we want to do as well is I want to create two at the back here just to add extra detail to the building. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just copy and paste these two nodes by selecting both of them and then doing my Alt click drag again. And what I want to do is merge these two streams together. So let's use our merge node. I'm going to select both those copies and then click and drag on the button to select them both. And now let's just view that. And we can see they're in the same place because I haven't transformed it, but I'm going to move this back on the x-axis. So let's just to see what we're actually doing. I'm going to connect this merge one back to this Boolean, and I can just click and drag on this and actually replace that wire that's connected there. If I just hover over this button and connect it, now you can see there that wire has actually been replaced. And let's view this Boolean. Okay, so let's move the second copy out. I'm just going to go on the x-axis here and move it outwards. And you can see I've moved it directly backwards, but obviously this is not ideal. I want it facing the other way. So on my transform, on my y-axis, I'm going to click and hold, and I'm going to hold down the control key, and I'm going to snap it around to 180. Now we can see we've got them facing the other way, and let's just move them along the X a little bit more again. Not too bad, but I don't want them onto the side. So let's move the Z-axis. I'm going to move them out a bit like so. And on my copy, let's just change the distance of this copy. And by that, I can just slide with the ladder backwards and forwards here to give me a better idea of what's going on. That's not looking too bad. I actually don't want them sticking out the top, so I'm just going to go to my x-axis again and let's just do this so they actually look like a slightly different structure. They're just facing inwards there at the bottom. So yeah, happy with that. And let's have a look at our building here again to see what we're still missing. What I want to look at now is this little bit of a top detail on the roof here and how we can go about doing that. Okay, let's just go down into our network, right to the bottom, building up a nice little network here. I'm just going to name this Boolean pillars. Okay, let's view this output. Okay, what I'm going to do is, you can see it's got this ghosting and this is displayed like this for the Boolean operations. Okay, so you can see the different Boolean operations. As soon as I press enter on the keyboard and I want to do another operation and it's kind of hindering me. So what I can do is drop a null over here. And this is just to clean up the network really. It's not, the null doesn't do anything. It doesn't contain any information. But I just want to add this here just to make life easier so I can select things a bit easier. It's just a workflow. And then what I can do now is I want to isolate this top part of this roof. So what I can go into is my selection mode, and I'm in my geometry selection mode, and here you can see you can select points, I can select edges, and then I can select primitives, and I'm just going to select primitives. I just want this one primitive. So if I select it, you can see it goes yellow. And now what I can do, I can either type tab and I can hit delete or blast, and I'm going to do blast, enter, and you'll see it's deleted that. Or what I can do, I'm just going to delete out this blast that we did. It's selected again, so I'm going to select it again, and I can just hit delete on the keyboard. And now you'll see in the network it's created this little blast node. Now that we've done that, I'm just going to go out and delete this. Just, we don't need it, don't really need it. But you'll see now I'm missing that face and I want to use that face. So on the blast, what we can do is there's a delete non-selected, and this kind of inverts your selection. And you can see now I've just got that top face. Okay, so let's have a look what we want to do. Just double check our reference here. See some stuff's moved around. So I'm just going to select all this, move it down a bit. Okay, let's move back to our reference. So we've got this little inset to the sides and then these little peaks. So it extrudes up. So you can see it's just an extrusion and some more extrusions. So let's have a look at how we can do that. Scroll out here, deselect everything. And then I'm just going to move this over to the side because I want to eventually merge it back with this building. So it's going to be kind of building everything off to the side and keeping this stream on this side almost clean. It will change later on, but for now that's the structure I'm following. And let's do a inset on this, and what we can actually do is a poly extrude again, and we'll be doing some other nodes at some point, I promise, not just poly extrudes. And for this one we can actually do an inset instead of a distance outwards. So if I do distance outwards it will lift it up, but we don't want to lift it up, we want to inset it. So I'll get this little edge here. but I want to insert it towards the inside. I don't want to go outwards, I want to go inwards. Let's just template this building over here with this boolean so we can see the building. You can see I've got that bevel, and then I've got this little inset that I'm creating here just to create that edge. But now you can see there's a solid bit in the middle. So what we want to do is we want to disable the front, and this leaves us with essentially the sides of that extrude. And then what we can do is then now we can do another extrude. So I'm just going to do another poly extrude. Oops, sorry, wrong node. Poly extrude. And drop that on there at the end, and let's view it. And now I can basically take my little distance handle and move it up. And you can see now I've got a little bit of height. I want to make it too high. That doesn't look too bad. I'm getting this nice edges formed. Now the only problem is we've got, go back to our reference here, we've got this little corners that are raised up, and you can see there's no information here to be able to do that. I need to be able to select a certain face to be able to do that, or put certain polygon. And essentially what I want to do is just extrude that part up. So if I had to do another extrude, and then on my actual grouping, you can manually enter groups here. And this is a non-procedural part. You can select this, and I can select this one face. When it's highlighted, I press enter, and you can see on this poly extrude, I've got this group naught. And you can see now I'm extruding that one face up only, that one primitive. But that's not ideal. Obviously, we want to be able to get to these corners. So there's another option we can do, and this is actually dividing the mesh up. And for this, we can use a node called divide. And this gives us quite a few options of things to do. And one of the options is to create these individual lines that we need to break up these polygons. First of all, you'll see when you select it, I'm just going to disable everything else. You'll see there's triangles on here, and immediately what it does when you drop it is it creates triangulated edges. So I'm going to click on this convex polygons to turn it off, and you see those triangles disappear, and some of these triangle value parameters gray out. Okay, so let's look at getting those individual almost subdivisions, but they're not. They're actually called Bricker polygons, and this actually works out quite well, these default values. But you can see what happens is, and I'm going to zoom in here to this area. As soon as I turn it on, it's creating these nice edges for us, but there's one here in the middle, and this is not what we want. We want it to look like this all the way around. So there's a couple of options you can try mess around with, but seeing as we've got a simple piece of geometry here, what I can actually do is I can just, with my little ladder wheel, I can just offset the values a bit, and you can see now when I offset it to the one side, now it's creeping on that side. So then maybe we'll just change the scale a bit. So let's change the scale up a bit, and then play with the offset. And you can see now I've got no little bits creeping through there on the sides. So I've got a fairly clean workflow. This is not 100% identical, but it gives it a bit of organic look. You don't want everything to be perfect anyway. And now that I've got that divided, what I can do is come back to my little extrude that we created here. And you see I've got that one group selected, and that group is called 0 currently, because it was before I did this non-procedural workflow. Yeah, before I added the divide, I selected a primitive called 0, and the primitive 0 has changed because now I've created a lot more primitives. So an example of this, if I disable my divide now, you'll see that whole edge get selected. And if I middle mouse to have a look at my details of what's going on, you can see I've got 12 primitives on this whole structure. And I'm just going to pin this here. You can use a pin icon to keep it up. And then I'm going to go to my divide. I'm going to enable this bypass. And so we can see now I've got it selected here. Now if I go info on this divide, you can see I've got 78 primitives. So what's interesting is the poly extrude node, and this is now where it becomes non-procedural because now it's confused because it's going, well, it wants to poly extrude on primitive 0, and now primitive 0 is only this little piece. That's just a bit of a side chat because what we want to do is select multiple of these. I just wanted to show you that that's exactly what was happening if you were confused. Let's just select this poly extrude. And there's two ways you can do these groups. You can select them here, like I say, and you can select in the viewport. So I can select here. If I hold down Shift, that selects another face, and then I can hold down Shift and select another one, and so on. And then when I press Enter, it creates that not group, but it enters those values up here. You can see the values are entered up here for the face or the primitive numbers. But another option, what we could do is actually create a group node. And for this, I'm going to create tab, and I'm going to create group. And I'm going to put this after the divide. Now this group node is quite handy because this allows you to do multiple things, and we'll utilize it a little bit further down the line in doing exactly that. But for now, you can see it's got the same kind of option. Here's a group name, which we can specify. And let's just call this, for instance, corners. And I'm going to keep the group type at primitives because I want to use primitives. And you'll see there's this base group. And now I can go, instead of having this selection up here, I can have the selection here. And then I'll go ahead and select those. So select one and then shift select the next one. Select this, shift select, shift select, shift select, shift select, and lastly shift and shift select these. Now I've got all these guys selected, and if I press enter now on my keyboard, you'll see now I've got this name here, corners, and the base group has got these primitive numbers in. Let's just check. Looks like I've selected some stuff at the bottom. No, I haven't. I don't have a bottom on there. It all looks good. And we can verify this group by clicking on here, and we go to the info, and we click on open on the info. Now you can see I've got this little primitive group that's come up, and it is 8 primitives in that group. And you could count them as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 primitives in that primitive group. And let's go back to our poly extrude, and I'm going to clear this out. And then in this little drop down over here, you can click on it, and you see I've got my corners. Now, essentially that primitive extrude is only being applied to these corners that I've created. And let's just dial that down a bit, and I'm going to do a bit of an inset over here. Kind of looks like that, a little bit similar to what I had in the previous build. And that's our top. Or what the last thing I want to do is just give it that bit of a poly bevel again. And I'm just going to drop that and snap it in here. And let's view it and then create a little bit of a distance here. And let's up that a little bit. And we'll maybe create 2 subdivisions, two divisions on the corners, so they're a little bit rounded. And that's looking all right. So now the last thing what we want to do is just squeeze mark here a bit, and I want to merge this top back with my original building. So again, we're going to do another Boolean function. And you could actually just merge these as separate pieces of geometry as well, using the merge function. It gives you a similar result, but later on, there's just 1 or 2 things I want to do, and it's the Boolean's going to perform a little bit better when you do that. I'm just going to connect the Boolean. Let's just view it, and then again we're going to change that operation to union, so they're combining the two together. Right, and just pressing escape on the keyboard, and let's pan around and have a look at how our building's looking. I think that's pretty good so far. Zoom into our reference, line up the angle here. Okay, and then on the next video, what I want to do is I actually want to start creating this garage door and the panels inside. Hi, and welcome back. So let's have a look at this garage door, and perhaps it's made out of wood or metal panels, but we've got this frame and these little struts or panels facing inwards, and then we've got these vertical panels. And let's have a look at how we're going to construct this. So I'm just going to go zoom out and go to my model. What I actually want to do is I want to start right at the top here. So let's view this Boolean garage door. And let's have a look at this model. So what I want to do is I actually want to work with this front edge. But ideally, what I need is actually this face that's missing. And if I view this, you can see it's not really what I want. It's all the way out here. So, but there's a potential edge here. And what I can actually do is just, if I duplicate the Boolean here by alt dragging, just give myself some space. And I can change this operation. And if I change the operation to intersect, you can see now, if I template this, I've actually got that front kind of face here. And this is one single polygon or primitive we can play with. So first off, we just want to select it like that, and you can see it goes yellow if I move my mouse away. And then I'm just going to press delete on the keyboard. And now that that's deleted, you can see I've got this hole, and it's not entirely what I want. I want the other side of it. So I'm going to hit delete non-selected. I've actually got two faces here by accident. I actually just want the one face. And then what we can do, we want to start off with the little outer frame. And for that, I'm going to use the poly extrude again. And let's just drop that on that button and visualize it. And then I want to extrude backwards, and let's use my distance again. And now you can see there's possibly a problem here, because we actually want this door to go inwards, straight inwards, and not going down at an angle. And if I view my template, or just view my building, you can see this edge goes straight backwards, and my little polygon extrude now is going downwards, and that's not ideal. So there's actually another option on the poly extrude that we can utilize. Let's just go to the top, and under this front transform, we can say transform extruded front. Let's click that on, and then this distance, I want to set this back to 0. So I'm going to double click to select everything, and then press 0 on the keyboard. And then I'm going to change this. This is obviously still, you can see the gizmos come up, and it's still pointing in the same normals as that face or that primitive. So I can change the space to world space, or in this case called global. And you can see now that the transform is changed to the x-axis, which lines up with this little gizmo in the bottom corner. And now if I slide this backwards, you can see I'm extruding straight back. And that's really what we want to do. So it's quite handy that you can do that. And then I don't need this one face, and that's actually in this case the front. So I'm just going to disable output front. And now I've got this little frame, but it's also got a little bit of a bottom edge here, and we don't want to frame all around. We just want it around the walls. So what I'm going to do here is another manual delete, going to select mode again, and then just drag over this primitive. And because it's one primitive, it's quite easy to select. And then I'm going to go ahead and delete on the keyboard again, and let's just leave that as that. And you can see now I've got this frame that's essentially just where the wall area would be. And what I can do now is just do tab again, and I could type in poly extrude again, but just wanted to show there's a history at the bottom here of the tab menu, and it shows the last few used nodes. So I can just click on that and then click over here on that node, and then it creates that poly extrude for me again without having to type it in. Just going to view it, and now I can adjust my distance as usual and bring this little frame out. And there we go. You can see I've got this little frame inset. Make it a slight bit bigger. There we go. And what I want to do is I want to work on those panels that run inwards next. So I'm going to use part of the same setup here and basically come up to this level where we were. So I'm just going to select all three of these and move them off to the side to give myself some space. So what can we do here is, if you look at my point count, for instance, and like we say, Houdini relies quite a lot on points, so this is quite important to have a look at. We've got all these points, but I need, if you looked at the reference, I've got all these panels, and there's a whole bunch of them, and that you would imagine as a bunch of polygons almost running down the side. So essentially what I need to do is I need to almost subdivide this panel into this. So I've got a bunch of edges here that I can work with, or primitives. And how can we do that? So we looked at the divide node, and that could work for us. We looked at that, and it's not too bad. But there's another method, and this is really for single faces and mainly for curves, actually. But it's a node called resample. And this is a really useful node. So as soon as I connect it, just watch the edge here. And now I'm going to view it. And now you see I've got all these points along this edge, and this is seeing this structure as a curve. And if I change this length, you can change the length to how many ever points you want. I can go massive amount. It's just middle mouse control click to reset it to default. And you can also disable this, and you can say maximum points. I only want 10 points, or I want 100 points in this setup. And this is also useful for a procedural setup where you want to have full control of what you're creating. But for now, we're just going to stick to the length one, and we're not really doing much variation here, and let's just up the spacing a bit. That's not looking too bad. If you imagine these are in between our panels. And what we're going to do with this now is we're going to do another extrude. And I'm just going to tab and then hit this poly extrude again here, and then drop it, click and drop it on this bottom button again. And let's view this. Again, we want to extrude straight backwards, so we're going to use this option rather, the transform extruded front, and set it to global. And I'll press enter on the keyboard. And now what I can do is just extrude it back quite far. So now you can see I've got these faces, and this looks like a subdivided edges and there's a whole lot of primitives that we can look at. I'm just going to disable the front, so we again got a kind of a frame. And another manual delete I want to do is just remove this bottom edge. So what I can do now is just go back to my select node and move it to a decent angle, and I can just click on one and drag and select to the reasonable point, and then we can let go, and we'll see now all those have selected, and just hit delete on the keyboard again to do that same operation as before. Now I've got this frame again, which looks quite cool. And we can, you guessed, we could just poly extrude it inwards, and let's just poly extrude it inwards. And now you can see you've got this edge, but what if I disable my point lookup and go into maybe smooth shaded mode with no polylines? You can see I don't have those individual panels. They're all just one panel essentially because it's one piece of mesh. I'm just going to change my smooth shaded view here again so we can see those lines. So we could essentially change this, and let's have a look at how we can actually do that. So what we can do is we can actually, I'm just going to go back to this blast so we've got a flat surface here. There's a handy tool that we can actually split these individual polygons, and if you look at, for instance, the point count on these points at the end here, you can see there's a point number 42, 43, 42, yeah, it's 42, 41, and so on. And what we want to do is we want these to be individual faces. So there's a handy little node, and that is called point split. Let's just type that in, point split. And let's drop that down, connect it into the middle between these two. And let's view that. Now you can see as soon as we view it, let's just disable it. You can see I've got a bunch of overlapping points. There's actually a lot more points here. And if I get my information, and this is where it's good to check the data in Houdini, my information on this blast, I've got 116 points. And if I do this point split and I do information on it, now I've got 228 points. And essentially it's broken up these into individual pieces. And now these points are just overlapping each other. Now, how can we modify this in an easy way? Well, there's another handy tool. And this little SOP is called a primitive properties. And you just type prim and there's a primitive properties, and we can click on that. And let's drop this in over here and view it. Now there's quite a few options, but what we want to do just on this is actually to enable this do transforms, and we can actually scale down the primitives. And what this node is, it scales down individual primitives. So if I just middle mouse over here and go to small value on my ladder and start scaling down, you can see now it's scaling each primitive down evenly, and you're just getting this gap in between it. And that's exactly what we want, except we don't really want to scale it in this direction, which is our X direction. So we can just, if we're happy with the scale, let's maybe make it a little bit thinner. We can just set this axis on the scale to 1. And now essentially I'm scaling 2 axes only. And I've got creating this little gap. So disable, enable it, we can see exactly what's happening. And now if we go to our poly extrude again and click on that, now you can see, let's just disable the point count and the point display. Now you can see I've got these panels, and it looks like little wood strips or metal poles, I guess. It's flat metal pole sheets. All right, cool. The next thing what we want to do is move on to the actual garage door, and let's see how we're going to generate that. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit back here again to the top, and let's just have a look at this garage door boolean. And we're working on this front face, which was all very well, but our garage door is actually straight down. So we actually would like to work on this back face, which is a little bit straighter. So what I can do is I can just basically copy and paste this if I want to, or I can just select this and view it, and then go to my select node and select the back face and press delete on my keyboard. Now, what's actually happening is it's dropped this new blast node, but it's dropped it after the Boolean, and it's still connected to below, which we don't really want. We want this to be a separate chain. So what we can do here now is just click on this connection line, connection wire, and we can just drag this directly to the Boolean. So I've got now my front face and my back face. Let's just delete non-selected. So we've got this front area, this back area. And let's start having a look how we're going to use this. First of all, you can see that if I scrub around this way, it's this kind of nice gray color. But if I look at this direction, it's blue. And this blue is indicating that the face is reversed and that the polygon's normals as such is facing this way. And if you look at the actual box, or if you look at the house itself, everything's blue. Oh, sorry, everything's gray. And if you go inside to the reversed faces, let's just zoom right in, everything's blue inside. It means this is the back side. And we don't really want the back sides, back faces, so we're gonna have a look at this again. A single face we created. I just want to create a template again of my rest of my model. And we can use another node, and this works on primitives as well. And this is called a reverse SOP. And we can just drop that, and let's just drop that onto this little button and set the view. And now you can see by default it does exactly that. Bypass it again, and you can see this. Now the face has been flipped around. Great. So now we just want these vertical panels. Let's just have a look at our reference quick. So we've got these vertical panels here, and we just want to create those. So the easy way to do that again is, this time we're not going to use the resample, but we're going to use the divide again. And I'm going to connect this up. And then as before, we want to disable this convex polygons to disable triangulation. Okay, let's just go in. We've got enabled our bricker, and we're just going to adjust some of these values. So we just want these downward panels. So I'm going to make this value quite large so we can start only getting these vertical lines. And then on a different axis, so I have to adjust my bricker here. And let's just go into a small value and give it something reasonable. That's not too bad. Let's maybe do one more. Let's offset it a little bit. Okay, it's not looking too bad. Just make sure we've got decent coverage here. So it's going to move that out a little bit, and then just shift things over. Just your words when I try and get to a decent looking setup, and it's working quite well. And then we can do the same process as before. We want to essentially scale it inwards and then poly extrude it. So I can do my split points, and I'm just going to copy and paste this again. And I'm going to connect this node up by dragging onto it. And then I've got them now, they split. So looking again at these point count, you can see the point count changes. And I can do this primitive again, and let's just copy and paste that in. And we're scaling it. We don't want to scale it on the y-axis. We just want to scale it on the y-axis. So let's just bring these panels in a little bit. We don't want big gaps between. And we can do a poly extrude again, and I'm going to copy and paste this poly extrude as well. And you can see now it's working on, because the poly extrude works on extruding along a certain face, it's going to just automatically extrude based off my previous settings that I had here. And that's quite handy just to quickly get consistency throughout your models. So now the scale is the same as the previous one. And there we go. We have we have our little frame of these panels and this back garage door. And what we can do now is just merge these together so we can see them as one object. And we've got this quite keen setup, so you can see there's a bit of a gap going on here. And this is just my center bit of these panels. We need to extrude them a bit further back. So going back to the chain where we actually extruded it, and it was this one. So I'm going to view my merge again, and then I'm just going to select this extrude, and then in the viewport, I'm just going to pull this back a little bit. And we can see now we're behind here, and we're not too worried about the internal stuff overlapping here. This is going to be hidden behind the rest of the building. And then just to differentiate it, I'm going to drop a little color node, and I'm going to connect this to the merge and view it, and let's just give this a slightly orange tint. Let's make it a not too bright color. There we go, something like that. And then I want to go down to my building again, and this time I just want to merge that in as a separate model, or not model, but almost a separate piece of geometry, whereas the Boolean is a combined geometry. So I'm just going to do a merge here, and then I'm going to merge my color and my Boolean, and then just view this output. And there we go, we have our first little garage door and our building. Everything's looking pretty good. We're just missing those panels that are running down the sides of the building, but I'm going to leave that up to you to come up with. All right. Well, let's move on to our next model that we're going to be building, and let's zoom in here and have a look. So we're going to build this little tower, and essentially it looks like a fairly simple model. So we've got a cylinder, or in Houdini's case, we call it a tube, the model, and then we've got a sphere, and this is kind of the dome, and it looks like just a half a sphere. So what we can do is get started with that and build those two structures first. So I'm going to start off with the base, and let's just zoom out here a little bit. Okay, we've got some space still, so I'm going to drop a tube and just hit enter here. So now we've got our little tube, and let's view it, and let's just explore some options here. So we've got different primitive types, and it's just a primitive isn't really controllable. It's one piece of geometry. And then we've got our polygons and then mesh and other options, which isn't really too important right now. So I'm going to stick to polygons. And then we can see we've got the connectivity, and we can change to different types of connectivity. And we can do rows and columns and stuff like that, or just output triangles even, and you see the mesh is triangulated. But we're just going to stick to the quads. And then we've got an orientation, so we can actually initialize the tube at any orientation we want. Obviously for now we just want it on the y-axis, and then you can also close this tube. So we've got our endpoints here, we can cap them, and we're just going to go ahead and do that. And then you've got your position and your rotation, the generic stuff, and then we've got this radius, and you'll see there's two values here, and the one's actually controlling the top and the bottom. So you can actually scale the one side down, this being the top, and then you can make cones, or go the other way and make a cone the other way. And this is really quite convenient because that's exactly what we want to do. We just want to create a slight shape like this, and then you've got an overall scale that you can bump up. I'm using the ladder here to scale it up and down. And then a height, and you can see it scales up and down the tube's height. So, and then obviously we can see it's quite a neat escape on the keyboard, got quite a low res polygon going on. So we can just increase the columns here. That is a starting point, and we'll see we've got start smoothing out and becomes quite a nice smooth shape. Obviously the one thing we got is this cylinder sitting in the middle of the origin again, and we want it to sit on top of the grid. So in this case we can go ahead and copy this height parameter, and you can see it's called parameter if I hover over it. And I can copy parameter, and in my center, my Y, shift the 0 here, and I can just paste relative reference again and then do that divide by 2. Okay, so now I've got a starting point and I can adjust the height, and my little cylinder cone is sitting in the correct place. Now I just want to go and I just want to template our original model so we can see roughly what size we're working with, even though I've got the sizes written down. Let's just have a look at our model and to see where we're sitting in relation. It's just good to have almost a reference of what you're modeling around you. And then we can just zoom in here again and have a look at the scale. So we've got a height here up to this point is 3.9. I'll make my height 3.9. Looks about right. And then the radius we're going to adjust. So this is saying it's 7.4 meters, kind of in length. Sorry, in diameter, should I say rather. And then we've got this value that's in radius, which is obviously our center point outwards of our circle. If you imagine it's a circle from the top down. So we need to work out the radius, and I've got 7.4 meters. So the bottom of this part is, well, there's an extrude here, so it's actually a little bit thinner than what we want. But for now, I'm going to type in, just to see how this works, we can do 7.4 units, and you can see it's massive. And then now what I can do is just divide it by 2, and I want the center point. And then I've actually messed with the scale here, so this radius scale should be at 1. And now we can see we're getting a better size. And then the top, I didn't really work out the top here, but we can just eyeball that, and because I've got this other geometry templated, so we can just kind of go to this side of it and let's just up it so the angle is roughly the same as this, so it just looks a little bit neater. And that's looking fairly decent. I think maybe the bottom is a little bit wide, so like I say, we've got on this outer measurement 7.4, so I still want to create this little lip here. So I'm just going to go ahead, now that I've got this expression in here, I'm just going to delete it. I'm going to bring that value down a tiny bit. So it just looks a little bit better. And then let's see, we've got these 2 little lips. There's a small little lip here and a bigger one at the bottom. And there's 2 ways we could do this. We could add new cylinders into this build and just merge them in or boolean them in. Or we could actually subdivide it and then do a poly extrude. And I'm going to do that method. I think it's a little bit cleaner model-wise. So we're going to go to our rows, and let's make quite a few rows, so we've got enough detail to work with. So because I'm going to middle mouse and up my columns a bit, try and get to a slightly more square polygon, get some more rows going. So I've got quite a thin, I can select one of these rows, and these rows of polygons or primitives, and that's quite thin, and then we'll select some other ones at the bottom. So I think that's working out. Now what we can do is we can actually do some geometry selection, and let's do this in the viewport this time so you can see what's going on. So I'm going to go to my select tool, and now let's just say on this one down, I think that's a decent one, or maybe the third one down might be visually more interesting. You want to select this, what we call a loop, this entire row around you, and you could shift select, and that's kind of difficult and time consuming. You could also try and drag and select, and again, time consuming. So what you can actually do, what's a lot easier, is you can actually just highlight one polygon by clicking on it, and then you can hold down your A key, and then you can middle mouse button. And if you click middle mouse button, now it selects that loop for you. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to select the bottom here. And in order to keep this selection going, I need to hold down Shift on the keyboard. And then what I want to do again, while I've got Shift holding down, I want to hit the A button as well, and then hit that middle mouse button again. And then one row down, so we're going to hit Shift again and click, and then A and middle mouse button on the one next to it. And then same here, Shift click, and still holding down Shift on middle mouse buttoning with the A down, click, and there we go. We've got a selection here now. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my poly extrude from the viewport, and I can go tab, poly extrude, and let's just enter that. And now you can see it's dropped a poly extrude in the viewport, or in the network editor for me, sorry. And currently it is not doing anything, but I can adjust the distance. And again, you can see it's going at an angle, and that angle is based off this faces. That's these primitives that are at an angle. So we don't want to do that. So I'm going to get to 0. And you can see at the top, this selection here has come, by the way, it's come up on this group. So it's just, these are the numbers of the primitives it's selected. And what I want to do is my extrude front again, but this time I want to keep it local. And obviously I can't move it in a direction because it's just going to move in any direction, rotate it for that matter. Let's just reset this. What I want to do is actually just scale it out, and we can do uniform scale here by middle mousing with the ladder and scaling it out. Or we can select this center point. I'll just go Y, press Y on the keyboard. Just press Y a few times so I can go, I've got my scale handles, and now I've got my transform handles, and this is the global gizmo, and let's just go back to scale, and then I can scale it out in the viewport as well, just to get a visual look on what we want. That's not looking too bad. And then I'm just going to press escape to exit out this mode. And that's looking all right. So I think the last thing what we want to do is add our poly bevels again. So we're going to poly bevel here in the network editor this time, and drop it on this button and view it. And now let's just change that distance out again. And you can see what's actually happened is quite interesting, is it's picked up that previous selection that I had, which is actually not really what we want. So it's actually just doing the bevel on this, and I actually want to do the bevel on the top corner as well. So I'm going to clear out this group here, and now you see it's trying to bevel the whole setup. And then we can go to our exclusions again, and we can just ignore these faces and go to that. And yeah, that looks quite good. So we've got some beveling happening around here and on the inside edge. That's quite nice. So it might be a little bit much. And then we'll just up the subdivisions a bit so it gets a nice rounding. And there we go. That's the base part of that. And then what we want to do now is move on to there's a little window here. You can't see it too well, but I've got a window there, and then the hole for the door we want to create now. And we're going to do it in a similar method to what we did before using a Boolean. So to start out, what I want to do is, let's do this door. And just having a look at it, it's straight up on the sides, and it's got this curve at the top. And how could we do this? Well, there's obviously a couple of ways we could. Okay, so we could come in and just perhaps draw a curve. So what I'm going to do is type curve here, and we do curve Bezier. Let's view this. So we could essentially draw a curve and click and drag and draw out the shapes. And it's not too bad to do. Obviously take a little bit of practice to get the nice arc correct here. Another way we could do it though is it's just delete this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is create a box here. And let's just do I'm going to template my poly bevel here so we can see the structure we already created here. And let's just select this box, and let's move this box out towards the side here and give it some height. And just overlap it a little bit because we want to do that Boolean operation. And that's not looking too bad, maybe a little bit wider. Okay, and now what we can do is we can actually just do another poly bevel here. I'm going to connect this up and view it. Now I can just increase the distance, and you see now I've got this beveling all the way around, but obviously there's not any subdivisions, but as soon as I add a lot of subdivisions, you can see now I'm getting this rounded edge, and just increasing it a bit more now. We can see now we've got almost that shape. We've got this straight up edge and then this rounded top. And I think that's a pretty decent solution. It's going to move this box out a little bit this way. Moved it. I just want to zero out the X so it's perfectly aligned. Or sorry, the Z here. And that's looking pretty decent. And now let's do our Boolean operation here. And let's just connect the first input, our building, to our door shape. And there we go. We've got the door shape, and that's looking pretty good. Now let's just add that window shape, and we're going to do the same thing, or similar things. So let's just copy and paste this by alt dragging on it. And I'm going to use the same Boolean operation. So what I can do is actually just merge these two streams. These two guys, so my door and then my window. And let's just connect this in, drag and connect it into this merge 5. So I'm keeping my Boolean visible so we can see what we're doing upstream. And then I'm just going to come over here and place my window like this, and let's just rotate this box around a little bit, and we can scale it down using the handles for the box. And you can see it's just quite easy just to get the shape exactly how you want it and where you want it. Let's make it a bit smaller here, insert it a bit more, and then obviously my poly bevel's a bit much, so let's just reduce the distance to a slightly more rounded window. We can reduce the subdivisions as well just to simplify the geometry a bit. And let's make this window a tiny bit smaller. I think it's a little bit large, so it's going to do that and keep it roughly in line with the door height. And let's make it a little bit smaller. So that's looking pretty cool. The next part I want to move up to on this model is this top part, and this is like a little cap, and I want to treat this separately. And why I want to do that is if you look at the model up here, you can see there's 3 of them. So essentially, we basically want to duplicate them, and it's pointless remodeling them every time for each component. So I'm going to build a separate little model, and then we're going to basically put it on top of this building. And I can show you how we're going to do that in a great manner. So let's go ahead and have a look at what this is made up of. So there's looks like another little cylinder at the top here, and then basically a dome, and this could just be a sphere. So two simple components, and let's go ahead and start creating that. So I'm going to template my current little building, and let's go ahead and do another tube, and I'm going to view that, and then I'm just going to bring it up for now just so I can visualize what the size is, and we're going to increase the radius here, my ladder button, and then it's not looking too bad. Yeah, let's give it a bit of space on the side so it looks like it's inset quite nicely. I want to reduce the height quite a bit, and then obviously we need to up the subdivisions here, so I'm just going to increase my columns quite a bit. That's not looking too bad, and then we're going to polycap it. Yep, it's looking pretty good. So let's just move on to the next component, and that's that little sphere dome. And for that, we're going to obviously use a sphere and the polygons preset. And let's just view that now. And what I want to do now, before I actually do anything to this sphere, is I want to actually move this tube that we've created. I want to move it back to the origin. And why I want to work at the origin at 0 coordinates is because I want to copy this around. And if I had to copy it around from this location, I'm going to get offsets every time I copy. And I'll show that off how that affects things a little bit later. And so we're just going to reset this center to 0. And then I want to just view my sphere. And now I'm just going to template this tube here so we can see what we're working on, and we're kind of working isolating on just this cap, top cap of the building. So I'm just going to increase my radius of my sphere a bit, and I want to increase the rows and columns just to create a nice detailed sphere. All right, not looking too bad. And then we want to find a way to just efficiently cut out the bottom, and there's kind of two ways you can do it. So you could come in here and go into your select mode, and you can press here, or you can hit enter on the keyboard, and this goes into your selection mode. I'm just going to disable and select here rather. And we could go into our polygon mode, and we could drag and select all these points, try and get them lined up, and then we could hit delete on the keyboard, and now we've got that dome half a sphere. That's not exactly efficient, and it's actually not very procedural either, because if I had to change anything, so I decide later on there's not enough resolution in the sphere and I want to up the subdivisions, and you can see as soon as I start changing things, that selection changes too, because the count, the primitive count, is changing, and it doesn't know where that selection was. So it was a very specific, it's selected by numbers. You can imagine now the numbers are changing. So in this case, what we want to actually do is I want to drop what's called the clip node. And let's do that and see what it does. So let's drop it down and clip, and then let's just view it. And now you can see immediately it's basically doing exactly what it says. It's clipping it. And by default, it clips it exactly how we want it, but you can clip in any direction. So for instance, if I rotate the clip around, I can move that clip around and I can clip it in any way. And this is a fully procedural way of clipping geometry. So now if I had to go in and change the resolution of the sphere, you can see nothing changes. You don't get any random selections on the side, and that's just because it's actually the way this clip is built is that it just deletes everything that's below the line. So I'm just going to go ahead and select this, and I'm going to reset the direction here and the origin to 0. So everything's at 0 where we want it. And now that's not looking too bad. Maybe we can bring this little dome around a bit, slightly down a bit. Just kind of just offset it a bit so it's not straight on the edge here. And then you can see there's a hole at the bottom. And while this isn't really too important for this model, what we can do, there's another node, and we're going to type polyfill. And we're going to drop that down, and let's just connect it up. And what this does is it tries to fill in where it sees holes in geometry. So we can go here, and then you can see it's giving me an error. It's not really working currently. And I'm going to just change this thing to single polygon. And what it does is just creates one single large polygon. It's not concerned about connecting any points or anything. And that's just that's efficient, and this just helps you close out geometry with holes in. There's some other options here we could look at. So I'm not going to cover them all, but you can look, if you click on triangles, for instance, you can see the bottom bit gets triangulated. And there's a triangle fan, and this one works quite well. You can see it's selecting all these points and almost trying to create a center point for us. But we're just going to stick to a single polygon now. We don't really need any detail in here. It's just to close the geometry out to make it solid. And then what I'm going to do is just go here, and I want to boolean these two together. And I'm going to boolean my tube with my dome. And now we've got these two pieces that are, you can see it's now disappeared. So what we actually want to do is we want to set the operation to union, and that combines the two pieces of geometry. And then lastly, we need to add our little poly bevel again. So let's do a poly bevel again, connect this up, and I'm just going to view it again. And then let's just change our distance. Quite nice and all around, and add some subdivisions, and then again do our exclusions. Just up that so we just left with these edges, and we've got some rounding happening. Make this a little bit smaller. And that's looking pretty good. Now what I want to do is, like I said, we've created this in the center. Now I actually need to put this little dome on top of the rest of the building. So first off, I'm going to create a null here. And I'm just going to drop this down at the bottom. Now, null doesn't do anything. It's just an empty piece of information. And this just allows me to create names. So I'm going to call this dome. That just gives me a clear indication that this geometry upstream here is part of the dome. Let's just compact my little setup here a little bit to organize it. And I'm actually just going to color this as well. So let's make it a greeny color so it stands out. And we can see it later on quite easily when we want to attach it to the other parts of the buildings we're going to model. Now we want to place this, like I say, on top of this building we've started building here, this structure. So I'm going to view this guy again so we can see it. And now what I want to do is I actually want to create a match size sub. And let's have a look at what this does for us. Now we've used this previously just to offset things, but what I want to do here is I actually want to use both inputs. You'll see there's two inputs, and what I can do with that is I can actually use the second input, and then I can place the position of the first object on top of this. It's quite useful. So we're going to get some cross wires here. So I just want to, let's just neaten things up a little bit. So I'm going to pull my dome onto this side just for clarity. And I'm going to move that rest of that building out this way. So I've got my dome up here. And let's connect the dome into the first input. Now you can see immediately if I just view it, it's put my dome in the center here. And that's obviously not what we want. We don't want to really do that. But we actually want to use this building as the second input. So if I click on that, now you can see what's happened. Is I've got this bounding box. It's created a bounding box for this entire building. And it's what it's doing by default is actually centering this object into this building. And even if I, again, go ahead and try and translate this cap around, it's always going to end up in the center of this building. And that's just the settings, this justify settings. You can disable it if you want. And that's quite useful, but we obviously, like I said, we want this to be justified to the top. So we want to affect the y-axis. And what we can do is there's essentially two bounding boxes you can imagine. If you look at I'm just going to delete out this transform. If you look at our dome and you go, let's just, for instance, this is just for visual, you don't have to do this. But there is a bounding SOP and you can actually look at the bound. So that's the bounding of my cap. You can see there's the top and the bottom, and obviously it's just a flat box now. So just visually you can imagine there's a bounding box around this. And if I go back to my match size, the first input here is looking at that bounding box. And so what I want to do is I want to use the minimum of this bounding box, which is the bottom. And you'll see now that's snapping to that bottom here. And why it's doing that, by default, the second operation is set to same. So essentially what it's doing is it's saying, use the same value. So if I set this, it's basically setting this bounding box minimum to this bounding box minimum. But we want it at the top. So in the second one, which is our building, we can set this to max. And then this is the maximum of that bounding box. And now we've got this little dome sitting at the top. And wherever this building is, if we had to even move this building around, that transform. And let's just move our actual building to a different location. You can see that bounding is always going to stay there. It's always going to stay at the top. Which is very useful. So I'm just going to delete this out. And then one thing I just want to change, if we zoom in, I'm just going to zoom in here and you see we've got this bevel on the edge here. And I just also want to offset this a bit so it's kind of inset into this building a little bit better. And on the match size, we can do a slight offset. So this keeps it procedural as well. So whatever object I put it on top, it's always going to be slightly inside it. Cool, I'm happy with that. And now if I disable my template, you can see, well, I've only got this one object now, even though I've got these two objects connected. And this is essentially just a, like I said, it's using the bounding as a reference. It's not actually piping it into this and outputting it. It's only using the input. And we're outputting this dome. So what we need to do now is we need to merge these two geometries. And we can go ahead and let's just use our Boolean again. And you can just Boolean these two together. And again, we want to set the operation to union. And now we've got our little setup with our door in, the hole for our door and our window. And that's looking all good. We could obviously use instead of Boolean, we could again use a merge, but in this case, we want to try and combine the geometry into this one clean piece of geometry. Okay, now I just want to move on to creating this door. And let's have a look what we can do here. This door is slightly different from the garage, but some of the structure is the same. We've got this panels on the side, and obviously we've got a backing, but the shapes in the center is a little bit different. But we're going to use some of the same techniques. And again, what we can do is come to our Boolean. Let's just make some space here. This dome. I'm going to move this dome actually little bit more out the way. Because I'm using it multiple times, I'm actually going to put it at the top here. And I think once before we start modeling this section, what I want to do is space these pictures out a bit more. You can see now that we've started modeling, we need them to be spaced out a bit better. So let's just go to our tools and we can go edit background. And then I'm just going to move this model over here. And these ones I'm just going to move out. We'll probably have to move them again later. Just move them to the side. And then our little current model we're working on, we'll leave here. And then let's just move this main picture up at the top here, make it a bit bigger and move it up here. So we got the idea of what's going on now. Okay, it's a little bit better. And then I just want to go to my edit background images and toggle it off again. Okay, so we've got some more space. I've lifted up this area here so it's out the way. And because I want to use it on multiple models, I can basically branch off here and connect it to my models further down the stream here. Okay, so just going back to here before we've actually done the dome, we've got our little door merge. And like before, we did a door model and we did the intersect of this boolean. So I'm going to do the same here, intersect. Now you can see I've got this edge, but now I've actually got, just escape on the keyboard. Now I've actually got two things going on here. I've got this little other window in, obviously, but then I've got this lip here, and I don't really want that. So what we can do is actually we can utilize our setup a little bit higher up the stream. So remember we created this lip by doing this poly extrude. So I can just bypass that poly extrude and go straight to my tube. So if I use my connect my output of my tube into the first input of the boolean, now you can see I'm just using that edge of the tube, and that just cleans up away that edge. And then obviously we don't want to use this combined mesh for the boolean, and our window was our first piece of geometry. Oh, sorry, our window was the second geometry, our door was the first one, and we just want to connect those two together. And now I've got that shape going. Okay, so I'm just going to move this down even more, so we've got even more space to work up here with. And let's just carry on here and create the door. I want to keep the door to this side. So in this model, we had the building and then the garage door on this side of the building. So I just want to keep it consistent and keep it on that side. So let's just view this and let's have a look at what we did last time. So last time we had, if we go back to our door here, we had our box and then we blasted out this one primitive. And this is one primitive. You made a mouse and you see it was one primitive. But now the problem is, if we look at this boolean, let's go back to our other model and view it. Now they can see there's a whole lot of primitives on this front face. And what I could do is come in and obviously delete all these out. Just for example, just go here and delete some polygons. I'm not going to delete them all because I'm not going to use this technique. But if I go non-selected now, I've got, say for instance, my door, but I've got a whole bunch of primitives, and the rest of the operations that we did over here isn't going to work. We kind of relied on it being one primitive. So we can do that obviously in multiple ways. And the first part is I want to show you a different kind of delete. And this is going to allow me to delete this setup procedurally. And it's a little bit more, it's a little bit more efficient when it comes to proceduralism. It won't always work, but in this case, it's going to work for this setup. And we'll show you why. So we obviously used a blast here, and this you enter the group into. Now we've got another node, is actually called a delete node. And let's just connect this up. And let's have a look at it. So this has got quite a few options that we can do, and we can delete by this pattern, which is, this will allow us to enter values. So I can, enter the primitive numbers here and it will delete that. There's also different options here, like delete by range, and this is quite handy in certain cases. But you can actually delete specific, like every second primitive, etc. So not a good example to see this on, but we're obviously not going to use this. So, and there's an expression, and you can delete by expression, but we're not using that either. So I'm just going to disable this enable here, and you'll see there's a bunch of tabs, and these perform different operations. So I'm going to disable this, and then let's have a look at the second one and enable this. So now I've got a delete by bounding box, and this is so really useful for proceduralism. So if I look at this and I view it now, and I can actually view this box and I can slide it around, and as soon as I go into an area where there's geometry, it's going to delete that geometry. And this is quite useful. The only thing is I guess it's static to this point, and which is all right. It's kind of works for what we want. But if you had to, for instance, transform this mesh around, and let's transform the mesh around, you can see then I'm losing my delete again. And likewise forwards and backwards. That's obviously not ideal if we decide to move our door a little bit. So let's go ahead and delete this test transform. And so yeah, it works in certain cases, but we don't want to use this in this case. Then there's another option, and we're actually going to use this option, and this is the delete by normal. And this is quite handy. So deleting by normal is actually essentially what it's doing is deleting by direction. So you can go, it says normal up here, but if you look, it's actually direction. So we've got a x-axis, a y-axis, and a z-axis, which is currently set to 1, and then an angle to delete by. And 180, if you look at the model, would obviously be 180 degrees. So that's all there, well, pretty much halfway around the model. So we don't want to do that. We want to limit the spread angle. So now if I come down and I drop this value and start limiting the spread angle, you can see now I'm deleting along an axis, and that axis is currently it's set to 1, so that's my z-axis. So you can see now I'm deleting everything that's on that side, and I can actually set this to -1, and if I go around, you'll see now it's deleting that side. So then we can obviously use this, so this is quite handy. So if I set this to 0, I don't want to use that direction. I actually want to use the x direction, which is facing this way. And I'm going to set this to 1 and see what we get. And there we go. We've got this front face is deleted. I can change the angle a bit and make sure I've got all my points that I want in the front deleted. But obviously I don't want to delete it. I want to keep that and delete everything else. So again, on the delete node, you can actually set the operation and the operation to delete non-selected. Now we're just left with this face, and that's kind of giving us a procedural delete without manually selecting anything. Next, we'll have a look obviously at, now we've still got all these primitives, so you can see I've actually got a whole lot of primitives here still. And like we said before, we only want 1. And there's, I guess, a couple of ways you can do this as well. But one really useful way is if we use this divide node, and we used this before, but it has quite a few different options, and I'm just going to view it. So by default, again, it triangulates it, and we don't want that. And it's got all these operations like the breaker, and we used the breaker before. But it's actually got this remove shared edges, and this is useful. And if I click it, you can see it's removed all the shared edges. And so while if I view the points, it's still got the points. If I just disable this again, you can see these edge connections, but it's removed all the primitives in the middle. And now if I middle mouse on this or press the info on the divide, if you look here, you can see I've got one primitive now only. So now we're kind of back to the point where we had if we go to the side and we look at this, where we did a manual delete of that box, and we were left with one primitive. Now we've got this one primitive back in this setup. And what can we do with that? Well, maybe we can take what we've built already and see how much of that we can actually just reuse. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually just going to move this out the way for now. It's really not in a good spot. We'll move it and sort it out into a better location once we've built the door. But I'm going to select all these nodes that we use to create the door, apart from this blast, because we don't want to use the blasts. And then I'm going to copy and paste this and use my Alt and left mouse drag and drag it over to this side. And now you can see obviously it's still connected to that. All these points are connected to that. And what I can do is just drag select all these lines, all these connection lines, and then I can click on them and I can just pipe them all directly into this divide. And now you can see they're connected in there. So I can now look at my poly extrude that we did before, and that's working. I had a blast here, and this blast, again, not procedural. This blast in the previous build was, if you remember, it was deleting out this bottom edge. So we will have to change that. And again, we can do this in a more procedural way again as well. So let's try our delete again. And just put it up here. Connect it, sorry, up there. And then just delete this blast out. We don't want that. And viewing our delete, we can disable our by number again. And then we can go to our normals and enable that. And let's set this to 0, and we'll set our y-axis because we want to affect the the y-axis only. And then we can change our spread angle, and you can see now I'm deleting out that bottom area only, and that's procedural, so that will propagate through. If we copy this setup to something else, it will then immediately work. And then we're polying extruding it again just to give our door that little edge, the little the little boundary edge. And let's go have a look at this side. So this side was the little panels, the inset panels, and we did that resample. We're going to resample it again, so we get, you can see there's on this divides left us with points, but they're not evenly spaced. So once we do a resample, we're resampling all those points, and now you can see they're evenly spaced out again. And again, I can come in and do my extrude backwards, and then we've got this blast, so to delete the bottom, what we did previously. So I'm just going to trash this out. And then I'm just going to copy and paste this again to this side and drop it into this network right here. And let's view that. And now you can see immediately I've got the bottoms missing. There's a bit of a extra edge here, so maybe we can change the angle a little bit. And there we go, it's disappeared. Always worth checking those things. And then just moving on, we've got our poly split, which we described before, as it splits all the points into two. And then we've got our primitive scaling and our little extrude. And now we've got that set up already going. And let's just view the bottom. The last thing would be obviously the door. And the door is different, so let's just disconnect this for now so we can see we've got, and I'm going to disable my point display just so it looks a bit cleaner. And we can see we've got our little border and our little struts here, panels going in, and it's looking quite good. But now we need to have a look at this door and how we're going to treat this door. Let's just have a look at the reference again. And you can see we've got this flat panel with this almost cross in the center. Okay, let's move back down to our geometry. Zoom out here again. So we were at this divide, and let's have a look at what we can do here. So this is a certain angle, and we want kind of our door to be straight down. So we don't really have to use this geometry, but because the door's kind of inset into the inside, and we don't really need to use it. It's just like a flat panel that's curved at the top, and that could intersect with, if we look at our building, we could create just a flat grid inside here, and that would be easy enough. But for this example, I just wanted to show you what another method we could possibly use, and is to straighten out this geometry so it's aligned straight up in Y. So for that, what we're going to do is I'm going to drop another node. This is called a point. And I'm going to connect this one into this point. And this allows me to do point expressions with various options. And we'll explore some of this a little bit later on. But currently what I want to do on this attribute, I want to affect the P. And then there's this little Dex expression thing, and we're not going to type anything yet. There's a little drop down on here with some preset expressions for us. And you'll see there's a whole lot, and there's a flatten here, which we can possibly use. So let's have a look at that and see what it does if we click on it. Now we're going, okay, well, that's not really what we want. It's flattening it down. And if you look at the expression, and we know we're dealing with X, Y, and Z, it's saying basically flatten on X, or it's keeping X, sorry, and it's keeping Z. So these two values is keeping the current positions, and that's why you can see it's going outwards in the Z axis this way, and it's still got size in this. If I set this, for example, this self.x to 0, you can see now, let's just enable my point display. You can see now this is moved to this origin, but the points are actually flattened. Obviously, this is not what we want, but that's just to show you what it's doing. So let's just undo that quickly. And then I want to keep my Y position. So what I can do then is instead of this 0 here, I can type in self dot Y. And now we're back to where our model was. And that's obviously not flattening it out. But I want to flatten it out to this X position. So if I set this to 0, you can see now I've got a flat panel door, and it's obviously moved to the 0 position of my coordinates, because this is set to 0. So it's setting all these point positions to 0 while keeping my Y and my Z positions on my attributes. And you can look at this if you look at our geometry spreadsheet, and you can see there is all my X positions now. If I scroll down, all my points are set to 0, and all the other ones are retained. If I disable this point node, you can see now I've got values back in my X position. But what I can do, because this is not ideal, I don't want it directly here. So if I just, let's template, maybe we'll template a little bit higher up and have a look at our building. So here's our building. So we want our door to be obviously in the door frame area. So we can set this point position to a value. So instead of using 0, it can be maybe 1. And you can see now we're starting to move forward. So let's make it 3, maybe 3 units. That's a bit far. So 2.5. Now I've got this flat panel in here, and this could be essentially the back of my door, and it fits in this area quite nicely. Just moving this to the side a little bit. Now I just want to extrude this out a little bit so the door's got a bit of thickness. So we're going to do our poly extrude again. Connect this up, and let's view it, and then we can just extrude outwards a bit. I'm going to make it quite thick. And what we want to do is we want to take to our reference again. We've got these panels, and I actually want to inset the shape into this panel, into this door. So we're going to make it quite thick, and then I'm going to create geometry that we're going to boolean into this. And to create that rough shape, what we're going to do is let's create a box for starters. And let's just move this box into place. This again is not very procedural because I'm manually moving it into place. I just wanted to see the scale of things. And what I want to do is I'm just going to view it and then template my door so we're working in this isolated area. I'm just going to scale this out. I want to look at the top part of the door, so we're going to just do that. Let's move this up a little bit so I'll show you exactly what I'm going to do now. So we now want to taper it in to get this kind of V shape. You can see it's almost a triangle at the top and the bottom. So let's do that, and we can do again, we could edit this manually, or we could use our taper deformer. Let's connect that up. And now let's again just go into to enter onto the screen so we get our handles. And before, like we did, we can fit the capture. So we'll do N, that fits it into the region. Now if we just adjust the taper a bit, we can see we're not really in the right zone. So I want to cycle through the capture directions. And we can see that's not too bad. It's kind of facing the wrong way. So if I taper out that way, that's going the wrong way. So I actually just want to taper it inwards. And like that, not a total triangle, just giving it a bit of an edge there, shape like that. And we can see we're starting to get an interesting shape. I just want to make my box a little bit narrower like this. And obviously my taper is, that center point is sitting obviously there, but I want quite a straight edge at the back here. So I could just move my box. Let's move it a little bit back again and then adjust my taper's position. So what I want to do with this is I want to toggle the capture area, that is G, and then we can see now we've got this transform handle, and we can transform our deformer around a little bit by moving the capture area. So let's just go a little bit more sideways. So you can see now I've got creating this almost wedge, and I want a bit of an angle on it just to give it a bit more interest. I want to try and make sure this bottom's overlapped there. So that's working quite well. What I actually want to do with this box, you can see it's offset. If I look at it from the front, my door is sitting like this, and this box is offset a little bit, and that's actually offset. If you look, it's actually offset in the z-axis, and you can see there's a value here. So I'm just going to set this to 0. Now we can see our little box is in a better space. However, our capture region is now a little offset as well. So we can try and adjust that in the viewport as well and line it up. But again, there is a value here we can adjust on this axis. And we can set this to 0 on the z-axis. And now we've got this lined up box perfectly. And now we can go ahead and let's just boolean that into the outdoor shape. So drop a boolean again and connect these two up. And let's have a look at what we've got. So that's quite interesting. We've got almost that bit of that shape going but it's not quite there yet. We obviously got the sides to do and the bottom. Now what we can do with this is we can actually use this shape again without redoing it, and you could copy and paste it and rotate it around. But we could utilize a mirror node, and let's just type mirror, and let's just drop this, and let's view this before we do anything else. So you can see by default, again, there's a little handle and it's displaying a center point. This is actually centered at the origin here. And if we look at some of the parameters, we're going, okay, the origin is set to 0, which is this. So if I move it, you'll see origin changes. Go to 0 again. There's a distance, and this is just how far away you mirror objects. And you can scroll that up and down. And if I set this back to 0 again, you can see that the distance is equal on either sides of this 0 origin. And then we've got a direction that we can mirror in. So currently we're mirroring in the x-axis, and that's set to 1, the direction here, which we don't want to do. So we can set that to 0. And then maybe we want to mirror in the y-axis, so we can set that to 1. And now we've got a mirror in the y. And we obviously want to adjust then the distance, so we can adjust the distance here. And we can make the distance a lot smaller. There we go, we have our shape mirrored in there, and let's have a look at our Boolean again. And you can see we're starting to get that shape. It's not 100% there yet. We could possibly go in and adjust our box a little bit. So maybe make our box a little bit narrower. Just increase the height a bit. I think maybe that's all we need to do. That's actually not too bad. And let's just make the box a bit wider. Oh, sorry, hitting rotate here. And let's just scale this out on either side a little bit. And that's not looking too bad. Like that. And let's just make sure our box is in the center again. And then let's just create the two outsides, and we're going to do this same setup again, but just with a different angle. So what I can do then, well, what I want to do is just copy and paste all these guys out. And then I want to move my box down into a better position. Let's just say like that for now. And then we want to change our taper. So again, we will go into the viewport mode and we'll adjust the bounding box by pressing N to fit it. And let's cycle the capture and see what we can get. And cycle it again. And that's all right. Let's do that again. No, it's not working. This one's working for us. So what we can do now is we can just obviously adjust our taper. So it's a little bit bigger on the one side, but we don't really want to do that. So I think what we can do is just move this box to the other side of the door. So we get our taper working. And then this time I just want to go into that toggle capture, which is G, pressing G on the keyboard, and I'm just going to move this manually. And as you can see, I move the y-axis manually. I'm moving it into that capture region, and you can see now I'm getting the capture detail I want. And that's looking pretty decent. I think our box is coming too far on the end, so I'm just going to squash this in. And let's just adjust our capture length. So I'm going to scale this up so you can see there's quite a bit of options to play with. And now we can have a look at what's going on here. So we've got this sliding out. I'm just going to template my door here, so we've got a visual of where we want to place this next box. And let's just move our capture region again out, but let's move it to the back so we can see we're deforming it now towards the back and trying to maintain that shape. Our box is a bit higher, so Let's move our box down a bit. And what we can probably do, I mean, if you just look at lining it up, I guess this little visualizer with the axis here is, we want to try to center it here. And there would be other ways to do this procedurally. I'm just showing you a manual method, just so we can learn what these tools do. And then, yeah, just adjust the Y a bit again. And you can see now I've got quite a nice little setup. I can adjust my taper out a bit. And let's just refine it up here. And it's not looking too bad. And maybe we should just drop this into the door and let's see what it actually looks like. So I've got a mirror here still that is obviously set to my Y, and I don't want to do that. So let's just set this to 0, and I actually want to mirror this in my Z direction. And let's just move the distance and just refine this bit. So 0 is not too bad, and that's because we are actually at the 0 plane of my grid here. You can see it's on 0. This is the 0 line along Z. And we can see that's not looking too bad. So let's just merge these two guys together. Now those two are together, and let's have a look at our Boolean. And that's looking fairly interesting. What we could perhaps do, and just to give it a little bit more character, maybe is let's do a poly bevel on this inset. So we're gonna, on this section, we're gonna do a poly bevel, and let's just create some rounding on the edges here. Give it some subdivisions. I'm just going to disable my point display. Let's pipe this into the Boolean. So I'm basically poly beveling both these geometries at once, and then let's view this. You see I've got this little bit of edge here, and that's quite interesting. I think that's working. This demo. And that looks quite cool for the door. So I'm just going to go and delete this old pieces of geometry here. And let's just line these guys up a little bit better. Close up the gaps. And then I'm going to color all this yellow again, so it indicates to us that that's the door geometry. And let's merge this Boolean with this merge here. And now we've got our complete door structure. And let's just give it that same color again. And let's merge that back into our entire building. So we've got our building down here. There's our cap that we've moved off to the side. So I'm going to give myself a little bit more room here, just so things are a little bit clearer. Move this over. And I want to merge it with this merge here. So let's just drop a merge down at the bottom. Connect this in here, and then connect my Boolean in here. And this is this main part of the building without the cap. And I've got my little door in there. It's sitting nicely in there. And lastly, you just want to bring this little cap back, and let's just think of it in a nice way. What we can actually chain this in here while having it in a separate location. And obviously we want to use it in multiple places. So what we've got is quite nice in Houdini. We've got these little dots that we can add to the lines, connection lines. And we can, if you hold down Alt and you click on the dot, it will create this little dot node. And while I'm holding down Alt, I can actually let Alt go while I've got it selected. And I can move this line now to the side. And you can see now I'm basically, instead of crossing all my lines, I'm just moving it across to that way. And again, I'm just going to move this up here. We've got a crossed line here, but that doesn't really matter. It's not too hectic. And then my Boolean is crossed again. It's not, hopefully not too confusing, but yeah, these little lines are quite cool, and you can go to delete them just by selecting them and pressing delete. Again, let's just bring it back by alt-clicking on the line, and you can just place it by like that. If you let go of the mouse, it will just place it in that location, but then you can also click and drag on it to move it around. And if you want to connect things to this as well, you can branch off there and you can create a new connection here to something else. That's quite useful. So now I've got my Boolean here with my, let's call this door and windows. And then this is my cap. I'm just going to call it cap. Okay. That's all working. And then we can just change this connection point to this merge. So we've got our full model here going into our door. And there we go. Let's have a look at our reference. We've missed anything. That's looking pretty cool at the moment. There's some settings we'll come back to and modify later on, but for now, I'm happy with that. So now that we've done this, I just want to go back and let's review some of the nodes we've already used and maybe have a closer look at one or two of them before we move on to any more modeling. And we've got a couple that we've used. We've obviously used the bend, we've used the bevel and the extrude a lot. We've used some blasts, we've used a delete node and resample. So let's just drop these down. I'm just going to go perhaps on this side here, and let's drop a group, and I'm going to type group. And as I type group, you can see up here, the list is quite long. There's a whole bunch of group options. And let's have a look at some of them. We won't be looking at like the group joints and stuff. That's based for rigging. But we've got all these other ones, and we can have a look at that. And then after that, we can have a look at the delete node and see some of the other options within that. So I'm just going to drop a group, first group. And this is pretty much what we briefly looked at once before. And let's just have a look at doing some grouping on this model, for instance. So I'm going to connect it up, and we want to explore different type of groups. So you can do on your base group on primitives, you can select each primitive or a bunch of primitives. You select them and then hit enter, and then that gets populated within this base group. You can also change the group type. So at the moment I've been working with just primitives really, but we can also do edges or points and edges. So you'll see that changes because now I'm selecting the points with those numbers. So I can just go in again and select a specific amount of points. And then we've got edges as well. And you can see every time it changes because these values are different to the point values again. So let's just select some of those, and we've got that. And then vertices, we don't really use much grouping in that, so I'm just going to leave that out. It's all the same thing really. And then just going back to the points, we can disable this group. So if I don't want anything to group like this way, I can disable it. And then we've got a bounding region option, which we used on that previous delete node, and you can press enter on the keyboard and you can adjust this bounding region, and that will create groups. I've got my group set to points at the moment, and like I say, this is useful for procedural workflows, and you can now group things without worrying about if you change the size, or well, if you change the size it's going to change, but it's always going to stay in this area, that group, because it's bound, it's grouping by these bounds. There's another option on this. You can actually change this to group by another object. And what I can do then, for instance, let's do a sphere. I'm going to drop that here and then plug this into the second input of the group. And you can see now if I move my sphere around to a decent position, make it a little bit bigger, And you can see now if I select my group, I'm grouping by that sphere, and that's quite useful as well. So you've got perhaps another object like this that's intersecting and you want to do a group only at that time. This could even be an animated object, and you could animate it in. See, there's no group now, and if I slide it in, I'll start grouping that object, and if it goes out again, it deletes that group. And this could be like a nice dynamic grouping if you need to do something specific in that area. And just viewing the group again, and that's it. There's a different type of grouping with volumes, and I won't get into that. Convex holes, so that's the bounding region. And then like the delete, we've got the group by normals, and you can just change the spread angle, and you can create groups like that as well. Yeah, we've explored this in the delete node, so we won't mess around with these directions too much. And then we've got a group by edges. I'm just going to disable this normals. And this has got a few options. One of the ones we will use, and it's not really going to show up here on this specific model. I'm just going to delete this sphere. But to give you an example of include edges or unshared edges, let's drop something a little bit simpler. Let's make a grid. And let's just view this grid. And I'm going to plug it into my group, and then now view my group again. Let's just up the point count. And you can see now I've got this group which is gone yellow, the points, and that's grouping everything that doesn't have a connected edge. So everything that's on the outside. So if I had to go, for instance, and come here and select some of these faces, let's just go to primitive selection and delete this out, and I've got a hole in this grid. And if I go back to my group now and view it, you can see now it's grouping these edges as well, because edges don't have any connections, so it's unshared edges it's grouping by. And that's also really useful, again, if you want to delete or group in a specific way. Very handy to do. I'm just going to disable this. And then there's a random chance delete. Just remove this blast quick. And we can delete by a percentage, and you can see there I'm deleting 50% of my points, and that's randomly deleting them, and I can change this value, so I can delete 2%, and you can see I've only got a few points selected. And then I can go up and pretty much select their 100%, and then there's a seed that will just give you the variations. Every time I change that value, it will randomly select another one to change into that group. So it's also worth noting when we're in this geometry spreadsheet, and we'll look at this in a second a bit more, but you can see there is a group here with a group name. And when I've got the group selected, you can see these highlight yellow for me as well, just to give me an indication that those specific points are in a group. And these are the point numbers. If I just go away from it, so I've got, if I middle mouse here, I've got 2,500 points. And if I scroll down to the bottom of this, you can see I've got that 2,049, but it starts at 0. So it's 2,500. And yeah, you can see there's the position. And then when I go to the group, now I've got that highlighted, and there's a group pop up here. And this is quite useful. So if I give this a name, like test, for example, and you'll see it says group test, and that value everywhere it's grouped, there's a value of 1. And when it's not grouped, it's a value of 0. Okay, then let's just explore some of the other groups we looked at briefly. I'm just going to move this to the side and type tab and tab and type group. And we've got a group combine. I'm going to drop this, but I'm going to get back to it because we need more than one group. So let's type group again. There's a group copy, which is another utility, and that's just copying a group. I've got a group create, and this is pretty much this group. It's just called group create, actually. It's the same as just typing group. And then there's a group delete, and this is useful as well if you've got a bunch of groups and you want to clean up your geometry. I can just go in and select that group and delete it, and now it's deleting that data. And sometimes you want to do that just to clean up your scene and make your geometry a bit lighter. The more information you got on it, the heavier the scene. So just optimization. And let's type group again to see what else we got. We've got group expand. This is quite useful as well. And if I just go here and let's just change this group test to something else. So I'm going to perhaps go to primitives, and I'm going to enable some primitives and just manually select them for now. Let's just select these and press enter. And now you'll see I've got this group, this primitive group. And if I click on the group expand, what it's going to do is actually expand out that group test. So if I select the test as the base group, and I can go see the original one, highlighted, it's over here, and I expand outwards. So I can shrink it actually by going minus values, and then I can expand that group out, and it will kind of select all the faces around it. And there's a couple of options around this that you could explore. Really useful if you don't want to spend a lot of time grouping something and you know more or less where you want the group. You could, for instance, just select, say, one of these points and then do your group expand on that one point, and you can get quite a large area quickly. And then let's just hit this group tab again. And we go down to groups. Sorry, I didn't type out the word. And we've got expand, and then expression is similar to some of the stuff we've looked at over here with the group, like group by chance. And let's have a look at that. So if I group by expression, for instance, there, if I look at this expression here, there's a little drop down, and it's got various options, but I can say here by chance, and essentially what it's doing is the same thing as if we had to group by chance, random chance here. And you'll see there's it says random element, and it's taking a randomized selection of these primitives, and then it's just saying 30% minus, less than 0.3%. So if it was 1, it would be the entire thing, and 0.1 would only be 10% chance to do the group. And there's a couple of things you can do with this. You can essentially create an attribute, for instance, and have it in one area, and then you can actually use an expression to group by that area only. And then moving on, we just want to go to the group invert. It does exactly that. It will just invert your group. So we just need to give it a name. So we go our test, and there we can see we've inverted that group. Disable it. It's actually using this test. Sorry, that's one that I created up here. It's not, sorry. It's actually using this test up here. Sorry, my apologies. And if I do the group expand, you can see the group expand actually gives me a new name. By default, it's called group expand. And now if I go to group invert and I'll say group name, group expand, and you'll see it's giving me both of those at once. So let's just remove the test group. And now you can see this is now behaving correctly. So I've got my initial group, and then I view my invert, and it's inverting that group. And let's just type group again in the tab menu. And we've got group joint. We're not, like I said, we're not going to look at it. That's rigging stuff. And then we've got group paint, and just another useful thing, but also not very procedural. Let's just select my grid. I can just select on that, and then I've got a little, I can just paint on the surface. And what you can actually do is if you scroll mouse wheel, you can expand the brush, and scroll in and out, and you can expand the area that you want to paint. So you can quite easily create groups that you want, and just that's actually painted. So that's quite useful, but like I say, it's also one of these non-procedural workflows, so use it with caution. Not that there's anything wrong with non-procedural, just depends on the kind of setup you're doing. And let's type group again and see what else we've left out. So promote we haven't used, and let's just have a look at that. Another really useful way to group things. So for instance, now I've grouped this, that's called group paint. That's a point group, essentially called group point. If I middle mouse and see this info, what I can do is I can go to my group promote, and I can say group name. I can bring that in, so that's my group paint, and you can see there it's giving me that group. But now what I can do is I can change it to another group with the group promote, and this will change it to a different type of group. So from points, I can go maybe to primitives, and now you see that group has changed to a primitive group. And if I middle mouse on here and get the info, you can see I've got prim groups now, and the other one's missing. So now if I go back to the first one and I go info, I've got point groups, group one. And what it does is it actually promotes the group as best as it can to the new surface around it. And it also deletes out, by default, it deletes out that original group. You can keep that group if you really wanted to, and it's keep original group. And you'll get some warnings that it exists, so it's not really a good option to do. If you do that, you want to rename it. So let's just call this group paint 2. Oh, sorry, _2. And now if I press my info on it, you'll see I've got my point group and my point group 1_2. And that's not giving me any warnings anymore. But now I've got access to both those groups, and I can do different things with point selections versus primitive selections. Okay, and then I'm just going to tab and type group again. And lastly, what I really wanted to look at was this group by lasso. And this is quite a cool one as well. It's similar to the concept when we go to group by bounding regions. This is not, just set it back to box. So we've got an area that we can select, and wherever we move our geometry underneath, we'll always have access to that group in that location. You see the group stays there. And if I move my box around to the side, my group is still in that location, even though my geometry is changing underneath. The lasso works in a similar way, except it allows you to paint, like lasso paints of a group, and we just need to do that actually to visualize what's going on. So let me connect this up, and I'm going to view this on the keyboard. And then while I'm over the viewport, I'm just going to press enter. And this allows me to draw lines, essentially, or strokes. And I can select regions like this. And now what's quite interesting is if I actually move my viewport away from where I'm looking, you can actually see now if I rotate, I'm actually painting based off the direction I'm looking. So if I go this way now and I paint an area here, and it's created this blue lasso line. Now if you look at the paint, it was paint it in the direction that I'm looking. And another example, just to confirm, paint again, and now I've got painted in that direction that I was looking on. And this is a nice way if you got a specific scene and you need to do something like maybe from the top down, and you've got very specific areas you want to group, so you can come in and group things out like this, and you can actually middle mouse as well, and it gives you this little red lasso area that it draws, and that's just basically subtracting the group. You can see it draws it there, so I've got all these little lines, and then what it is those are just, as well, they stuck in space. So if your geometry is moving underneath, that group will always be in that location. And that's quite handy, again, if you've got some effect you want to happen and only in that specific space, you can group it there. And no matter what, it will always group there. Or if your geometry changes, so for instance, if I go to this and I get a really low point count, and you can see I've still got my group in that location, and that's really handy to use. And on this node, you can disable the strokes. So you can see I've got a couple of strokes, and just disable them, and it removes it from that group. And you can add to groups or replace it, and you can also just clear them out. So it will clear here if I press clear. So these lassos only show up when you're selecting the group. So if I had to do something underneath, for instance, you don't see those lassos anymore. It's only when I'm got the group selected and I'm viewing it with my active, my viewport active here. That's just good to know. And then we can, like say, we can clear it out, and that will basically remove all those strokes. And let's just clean this up a bit. The last one I want to look at here is the group by range. And this is quite nice to look at on a grid because we can see exactly what it does. So currently I've got my group type as primitives, and my start and end, let's not worry about that, but there's a range filter here. And what I can do is I can group every second primitive, and you get this nice value of every second primitive. Or I can do every third primitive, and you can see I start getting these lines happening, and this is really useful at points to do procedural selection. And if I keep going up, you'll see those kind of change. And then not only that is I can, if I say maybe group every 5, but then I can select 2 or 5, and that will expand that group downwards, and then we can offset that selection as well. And that's just really useful for procedural selection of geometry. And lastly, on the third grouping, I just wanted to look at this group combine, and let's just say, for instance, I'm going to connect this to my group by range. So I've got my grid, I've got this bounding box group that's called test, and then this group by range, let's just give this a reasonable name, and on the group type, I'm going to call this range. Sorry about that, range. And then we're going to connect this group promote. Now what this allows you to do is different operations of groups. So you can combine groups, you can subtract them, and do like a Boolean operations on them. So I've got these two groups, and what I want to do is give it a group name, and this is going to be a new name. So let's just call this combine. And I want to say equals to my range and my test group. And, well, let's just bring in one of those, sorry. What I need to do on the second one, let's say I've got my test group, and then I want to go union with my range. And now you can see I'm combining those two groups together. And then there's other operations. I can say equals all but test. So it's basically inverting that there. And then likewise, you can do intersect here. inclusive or subtraction, which is kind of your typical Boolean kind of operations. And then you can also change this value as well. So you can go union with all but range, and that will kind of invert that range. Likewise with any of these other settings, intersect, we can go to give you that, and but range. And then if you have a bunch of different groups, you can actually add them here and you can control a lot. And now you've got, if I middle mouse, I've got a combined group and I've still got my range and my test. And now I've got access to 3 different groups that I can do different things with. That's all I just wanted to have a look at, just exploring some of the group options. Quickly, I just want to go over the delete nodes quickly in the blast in the next video. Okay, just going to delete all these groups out. Let's just drop our blast node and we can obviously connect that, and like before we can select something and we can blast it out. And as we said, that's not very procedural. We can do this in other ways, so we can actually work with groups to do this. So let's again just go back to an example of the let's go to the lasso group by lasso, and let's just create a group, and I'm going to actually just call this lasso, and let's view it, and let's just paint a group here. So now I'm doing group by points, and I want to do my blast here. I want to switch it to that group and just clear out this, and I want to work on points because my lasso is a point group like that. And now if I delete, now I'm essentially doing a procedural delete, and if I move my grid around, you can see now I'm deleting wherever that lasso is. Very useful. And then that's just one option of deleting, and obviously I can do a delete non-selected, and that gives me all the inverted. And then there's some extra options that we don't really ever use much. The one that's quite useful is delete unused groups, and if you've got a whole bunch of groups and you're piping something out to the side, it's quite a useful feature to have, but we'll have a look at that at some other point. And then I just want to drop the delete node and just plug this into this lasso as well. So we can do the same thing. I can bring in my group here, and I can switch my entity here to points, which is what I want to use. And this gives me the same result. Let's just turn off that and view the delete again. And you can see it's giving me exactly the same results. And then I can delete non-selected. And what you can do as well, then you've got we've explored before, you've got your bounding box, so then you can actually add to that with some other options. Quite useful just to delete things in one go. So you've been deleting by group, but you're adding to that group at the same time. And we've got our normals, and we're not going to look at this degenerate. And then your random again, deleting by chance. That's just also quite useful to use. So just being able to combine them with other groups and use the delete at the same time. And then just disabling that and going back to this first tab, the number, you can see up here is by pattern, and that's just giving me a pattern of pretty much everything, but you can change the operation. And yeah, we've got the delete by range. So I can now delete, like we showed with the group, you can delete by a certain range. And let's just disable this, or take this lasso out the equation and maybe switch it back to primitives. And now we can see we're doing exactly like we did with the group, except we're doing it on the delete node. It's just another option to do it, and that's if you specifically want to delete stuff. And then we've got the delete by expression, which will allow you to delete based off attributes if you've got any. Yes, I hope that gives you a little bit more clarity on groups, and obviously grouping is quite a large topic and there's not too many deletes. You can delete actually by, well, like expressions, but you can actually delete in wrangles and in vex, and we'll get to using some of that at a later stage as well. So just exploring another way to delete geometry